Okay, good morning everyone and welcome to the People and Overview Committee. First of all, thanks very much to everyone for the early start. We've got quite a monstrous agenda to get through this morning, so it's appreciated that we've been able to start half an hour early. Just for the benefit of members in the chamber and also those watching the meeting, there are a number of people joining us virtually for a number of different reasons. They haven't been able to make it here today. So without further ado, we'll just introduce the members that are in the room. If you can just introduce yourself and say where you're from, starting with Cathy.
Hi, I'm Councillor Cathy Lugg from Verdun North.
Good morning, everyone. Councillor Ryan Holloway, Ward Member for Wareham.
Good morning. I'm Anthony Alford from Egerton Ward.
Pauline Batstone, Blackmore Vale Ward.
And obviously myself, Mike Parks, Ferndown North. Okay, moving on, we'll start with apologies.
We have apologies from Councillors Stella Jones and Jean Dunseith.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Does any member have any declarations of interest on this agenda? Councillor Alford.
Thank you very much. I have been at a previous meeting of this council, an overview committee, which has had the opportunity of discussing item 8, the council plan refresh. Now, it seems to me as having had one go at it, it would be unfair to take advantage of this committee to have another go. So I won't vote on that matter or say anything substantive.
Thank you. I do appreciate what you're saying, Councillor Alford, but I do feel that it's a refresh of the plan, so you are quite at liberty to take part in it.
I note that, thank you.
And as my Vice Chair says, we'll be grateful for your wisdom. Does anyone else have any declarations of interest? Okay, moving on. To confirm the minutes of the meetings of the 3rd and the 11th of May. They have been circulated to all members. Does anyone have any comments on those? Therefore, could I have a proposer that we accept both of those sets of minutes,
So
please?
moved, Chairman.
Sorry. Okay. All in favour? Thank you. Public participation. There are no questions from members of the public, and we've had no questions from members submitted. There are no urgent items, which then moves us on to item 7, which is the home to school and post-16 transport policies, and that's going to be presented by Ed Denham.
Yes, good morning. Ed Denham, responsible for school admissions and school transport. The transport policies are renewed each year. This determines the support that we give to both children at mainstream schools, children going to special schools, and children accessing, or young people accessing post-16. And this lays out our duty to support those various groups of students to access their education through the transport system. We went out to consultation on the new policies. The policies are fundamentally unchanged. They adhere to DfE guidance as laid out in their relevant documentation that they send out. It adheres to that documentation. The only change that we did consult on was a rise in the surplus seat. The surplus seat is a situation where if a family is not entitled to free transport from the local authority, they may wish to buy a seat on a council-sponsored transport in order to get to a school of their preference. And we have that in place, and we do make a charge for that. Last 3 or 4 years, we had an incremental increase in that charge, coming up to 800 is the current one. We have have increased that to £825 for that service should a family wish to purchase a seat to go to a school that that they're not necessarily entitled to free transport for. Also, that 800 to 825 rise also covers the cost that we ask for post-16, where a young person applies for a seat on post-16 transport, but it is also the value that we ask back from families whose children are attending a special school, who are on EHCPs, where their transport could be significantly in excess of that value, but we ask for that family to contribute the surplus seat cost. There's no change in this policy. This is the policy that's been in existence for 3 or 4 years now. And so that is the value that we use. Obviously, families on free school meals will get a 50% discount on that where applicable. So that is the only change in the policies. And so there are four recommendations that this is taken forward to Cabinet for the changes in the mainstream policy, for the change, and including the increase from 800 to 825. Also the post-16 transport policy increase 800 to 825, and agreement that we don't reconsult on the increase in the surplus seat cost each year. It is just agreed that it will be accepted that there'll be an increase on the RPI on the value of that surplus seat cost. And the fourth recommendation is that, subject to any statutory changes required by the DfE, that we would not reconsult until October 2026 for the academic year 2027-2028.
Okay, thank you for that. Do any members have any comments? Councillor Alford.
Yes, I'm going to make some general remarks. This is the first time I've studied a paper on this topic, and the initial impression I have is it's something that ought to be really straightforward, but has been made mind-bogglingly difficult. And it does seem to me as though it was produced many years ago. It's had minor adaptations since, and in many respects, I feel as though it really is quite difficult to follow and understand. And if I take an example, and I'm on page 26, I think it is. Yes, at the top. And we say if the child is in year 5 to year 11, age between 9 and 18, who lives 3 miles or more from the catchment area or nearest school. Now, the way that I read that is that somebody qualifies under that clause if they live outside the catchment area. But I don't think that's the purpose or what the author of this really is trying to say. And just a bit further down on that page, we have a line that goes, eligible transport is currently provided to the nearest catchment or catchment area school where the child meets the qualifying criteria. Well, I don't really know what that's trying to say. And I just really feel as though this whole policy needs to be completely rewritten using plain language that people can understand, and then we have something that would be very helpful, and I think that does need to be done soon. That's the main topic I wish to talk about. I do need to make one observation on the increase. You know, we're making an increase from 800 to 825, I think it is, whereas elsewhere we say in future it will be RPI. Now, this year's increase clearly isn't RPI, so I don't understand the logic of increasing it by RPI in the future, but not this current year. And that seems to be nowhere explained. And there is something about Swanage School. I don't know whether we are making any recommendations about that. It seems to be something that is being perhaps ignored because it's too difficult. I just wonder if a solution of this is to permit 2 catchment areas for the purpose of this policy. So a person or a family could live in one or the other and make decisions accordingly. Maybe that's something that needs a bit of further thought, I don't know. I think that's it for the moment, thank you.
Thank you for that. On the first point about the complexity, I think I absolutely agree with you. It is a fairly complex set of arrangements, and trying to detail what each individual family's circumstances are in relation to the applications, their catchment school, which is their nearest school, and it is inherently complex. But I note, and we will look to see if we can really tidy up the language, but unfortunately the essence of the policy is complex, but I take the point about tidying up the language, absolutely. In terms of sorry, your second point.
I talked about the increase
on the RPI.
comparison with RPI after that, so I
Yeah.
have the increases like RPI this year.
When we went out to consult, we did use the RPI that was there at that time. So it was a relatively smaller increase than if we were actually doing it right now. So the RPI, as agreed with colleagues in transport, we used when we went out to consult some months ago. So that's the reason for the discrepancy in the values.
And Swanage School,
And
how is that going to be resolved?
I think we keep ongoing discussions with the school, looking at the options, and taking advice about how we may proceed with that one. But at the moment, the recommendation is that we maintain the transport priority area for the Swanage School and transport to the Purbeck School based on the existing catchment. But we will continue to have ongoing discussions with all schools around that particular element.
One general remark following that, because I don't feel as though my questions have achieved very much that's useful so far. I feel as though as a council, we ought to have policies in terms of the way we communicate, and it is customary to adopt the plain language as an organisation that's responsible for plain English. And I think organisations that adopt the policy of plain English will produce all documents, however difficult they are, in language that people can understand. So I feel as though, having inquired about it, I don't feel as though I'm making any progress. And I feel as though there ought to be progress. So that's really it.
Are you putting that as a proposal, Councillor Orford?
Yes, I'd be happy to do so.
Could I have a seconder for that, please? Thank you. Could members vote on that then, please? Is everyone clear what the proposal is? Could you repeat the proposal, Councillor Orford?
Yes, what I'm suggesting is an amendment to the recommendations, and the amendment is to rewrite the policy in plain English, according to the plain English standards.
Thank you. We've had
Vic is desperate.
sorry, Vic.
If it's at all helpful, one thing myself and Ed Denham could look at is a parent-friendly version that sits on top of this policy that simplifies the language, but still brings through the elements of the policy that are relevant in that respect. And we do that with a number of documents in children's services where there are significant and lengthy policies, but that require summary, and quite often we do that with our parent care forum. So if I could put that forward as an option that may alleviate the concern.
Councillor Alford.
I would expect the parent-friendly sort of user side of A4 to exist anyway. So I don't think that really solves the problem that I'm trying to tackle.
I think I have to agree. It is a complex document, and I think you make a valid point that it does need a refresh. So we have a proposal, we have a seconder. Could I have a show of hands from members, please? Okay, that's unanimous that it goes back for a rewrite. Does any member have any other comments to make on this? Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on a point on recommendation 4, where it says that the policy is to be reconsulted either in October 26 or 20 at the earliest. To me, that seems quite a long way. That does, because that's halfway through the next term. So I'm just curious to the fact that we live in times where things are sort of moving at quite different paces, at the moment. So I'm just a bit concerned that maybe that date should be brought forward. That would just be something I think that probably would be not a bad idea. That's all, because it just seems it seems 4 years just seems a long way, and a lot can happen and change in the council in 4 years. Thank you.
I will take it on advice to bring it back in a timeline that's acceptable. That was just a nominal proposal out there. Yeah.
What do other members feel about that time? Councillor Lugg.
It does set out exceptions to that if there's change to the statutory guidance, so I'm quite comfortable with the 4 years.
Does anyone else have any comments? Can I suggest that we leave it at the time frame that's in there, Councillor Holloway, but as Councillor Lugg says, there are opportunities to review it in that time.
We have the recommendation to rewrite the actual document in plain English, but do we need to specifically agree the surplus seat price rise today in any case as part of our recommendation? I presume we do, for budgeting purposes. So that wouldn't...
For recommendation to Cabinet for the price rise from 800 to 825.
Okay, are members content that we accept that price rise, or does anyone have any comments on it? Okay, and I think Councillor Alford did raise a comment which we've had an answer to. So if everyone's happy, we'll accept that price rise, and we've had a recommendation to rewrite the policy. George, does this need to come back to this committee before it goes to Cabinet?
No, this would just be your recommendations to Cabinet.
So this committee won't see the rewritten report, rewritten policy.
Cabinet needs to agree to the recommendations to rewrite it.
Right. Okay. All right. Fair enough. Okay.
So if I move the recommendation 1, 2, 3, 4, but additional recommendation for rewrite in plain English.
Thank you. Do I have a seconder for that, please? Sorry. Councillor Batstone said that would move recommendations 1, 2, 3, and 4, but with the exception that with the addition, there's a rewrite of the policy. Councillor Lugg seconded. All in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Thank you, members. Okay, we move on to item 8, which is the Council Plan Refresh 2022 to 24, and that's going to be presented by Deb Smart.
Thank you. Excuse me, thank you. So the council plan is being refreshed to ensure that the latter 2 years of the plan align with the current strategic priorities for the council. So today, myself and Councillor Haynes, who's online joining us virtually today, are here seeking the committee's high-level feedback and input, particularly on the draft council plan, which is at Appendix 4 of your documents. Specifically, do the 5 priorities now represent and incorporate the leadership mission statement? And there is a grid on page 75 of the documents detailing how the new priorities have changed from the old priorities, and the leadership mission statement is at page 78 for your reference. Secondly, what is the preferred format for presenting the Dorset Plan Council priorities? So do we want to stick with, and this is where I'm going to be a bit inelegant, the sort of wheel format, or do we want to go with this a cross-cutting format? And that's in the plan at Appendix A for your advice. We'd like to see which way you think those priorities look best to be displayed. And then lastly, really, whether the plan should be accompanied by a supporting delivery plan. So we haven't previously had a specific delivery plan accompanying the corporate plan, and we seek members' input on whether we should have that plan. So while the comments from Place and Resources Overview Committee have been incorporated, and I think you can see those changes have been detailed in the covering report, this actually now is not the latest version. The corporate leadership team and portfolio holders have been working significantly on the detail of both the plan and the delivery plan targets. So just individual words may still change, and indeed, if we can just keep feedback to a high level, that would be really grateful for that. There is a process following all that final input and your input from yourselves today to take the process and the plan and the delivery plan through a plain Englishing process following comments at Place and Resources Committee, and then there will be a final design piece. So inevitably what you've got today will change somewhat. So that's why we were just asking for high-level input on those priorities, what's detailed there, what the format we think we should display our priorities in, and whether or not we should have a specific delivery plan with targets so we can measure our progress. Thank you. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you for that. I think probably the easiest way is to split this down. If we can address content first, and then we'll look at the way it's presented second, if that's okay. So if members have any comments on content?
Chair, sorry, I need to declare peculiar interest on this because on the agenda it mentions about the Dorset Innovation Park, and as an interest, I do have a business that is located and is on my registered interest, so I cannot take part in this discussion or vote on that, I believe.
Okay, thank you for that, and that's all noted, Councillor Holloway. Does anyone else have any comments on this? Councillor Miller.
Thank you, Chairman. Not a member of the committee, but Laura Miller, Beddoe, I just got married. We're in the middle of the name change confusion. So thank you for letting me speak. Just a very quick one, because I sit on the cabinet and my portfolio is culture, communities and customer services. And I just wanted to sort of introduce a thought that if this committee is looking at the content and what we should be prioritising. I am having sort of ongoing discussions with colleagues about how we prioritise culture. Sometimes I think as an organisation it's not something that people expect that we do, but we do work very closely with the Arts Development Company, who we fund to deliver our cultural strategy. And I think the statistics are something like for every £1 we spend on culture in Dorset, that attracts £37. So it's a really good economic case as well. So I would just like to ask this committee when you're considering content, and also when we're looking further down the line, as Debs has just outlined, it is a process, that we perhaps pop culture in. And my suggestion would be, I don't want to get into, the red pen detail. I appreciate, Debs, that you want to keep this very strategic, but where we look at our partners that we work with, that we pop in the Arts Development Company. And I have to go early, Chairman, so I apologise, but where when you're looking at the little logo, I'd love to see a little cross-section line under supporting people that says culture, because that goes right across from our AOMB work that we do with our natural landscapes to delivering dance workshops for adults with a learning disability. So culture really does cut across everything, and I'd love to see it there. My tuppence worth, although I don't vote on this committee, is the Arrows logo, because the circular one reminds me of a Trivial Pursuits bit, and that makes me anxious. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you very much. That's really useful, Laura, and it's fantastic that we are going to support the arts. Councillor Batstone.
Just for clarification, please, Laura, you said £1 brings in 37. Is that £1 investment bringing in £37 of grant funding or money, or does it create £37 worth of value?
Sure. On the detail of that, you'd have to look to activate, because that's where I got the statistic from when I met with Kate the other day. But my understanding is that it's both. So it creates jobs. It actually takes some of our requirement for where people have direct payments. For example, the example of a dance class for adults with learning disability. Of course, people pay to see shows, but of course, culture is so much more than that. If you have a sculpture trail on Weymouth seafront, people are going to come and walk the sculpture trail. They're going to maybe have a beer. They're going to maybe buy fish and chips. So my understanding is that £37 is what's brought in. Of course, we do another important part of putting culture quite high up in our council plan priorities, is that if we do that, it sends a very, very clear message to people like the Arts Council, like central government, that culture is a priority for Dorset. And we've got so much here already, it's so rich. But if it's in our plan, then we stand to actually leverage more investment from those people who've, let's face it, got the money. So thank you. Hope that's helpful.
If I could just say, I welcome that proposal, because I've just survived the Sturton Newton Literary Festival, which was hard work for a fortnight. It was absolutely brilliant. And we began a literary festival in our little town because of the desire to bring people in to spend their money, and that's what it's about. So thoroughly support that inclusion in some way. Thank you.
Councillor Alford.
Thank you, Councillor Alford, Egerton Ward. I'd just like to follow up what Laura has just been telling us, because I do agree altogether with your suggestion there. And I look at it with two reasons, one of which is the economic argument that through the multiplier, etc., culture does generate prosperity for people in our county. And I do think that some of the calculations that are produced by various worthy organisations are somewhat exaggerated, but I accept the principle that it generates value to the community, economic value, that is. But even more than that, the cultural value is almost inestimable. And I think when it comes to thinking about a council plan such as this, what it does do is display a sense of humanity. There is a sense of mission and purpose and understanding of people behind that, rather than just being a very raw piece of text that doesn't relate to people. So I think that is the way you can best take advantage of the cultural issue and just generate a sense of what our mission is, what sort of people we are. And that, I think, could be very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Orford. Just for benefit of anyone watching online, Councillor Ezard's now joined the meeting. Welcome, Beryl. Waiting online to speak is Councillor Wharf.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much. I just wanted to add a further point to the point that Councillor Miller made. And Councillor Jonathan Price is in the audience, so he can add to this if he felt so inclined. But of the 10 mission statements, you might think that only 2 of them apply directly to adult social care, but the executive team, the directorate team, have been through the 10. And the interesting thing is that adult social care has a role to play that we can see in 9 of those 10, because in various degrees. So this exercise has been really useful, and at some stage you might want to tease out just how much detail is in it. I take Deb's point about not going into detail, but I think the mission statement is a really useful starting point for the next 2 years, and it would be worthwhile, I think, for the committee to tease out some of the more detailed avenues that people are following that are not necessarily directly related to the directorate that is presented there. I hope that makes a bit of sense. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Orford. John.
Thank you, Chair. Not a huge amount to add, other than obviously we are going to be talking through the adult social care strategies, and I think that there are opportunities really there to link much of the example that you talked about, Councillor, into that work, because the focus is very much the community through our delivery, future delivery. So we'll come on to that in the session, but Peter is correct, and there are many links from the work that we'll be doing across the 10. Thank you.
Thank you. Do members have any other comments on the plan? Sorry. Apologies. Yeah. So just before we move on to Councillor Haynes, who's again waiting online to speak. Do any other members have any comments on the content or the priorities? No. Okay. We'll move to Councillor Haynes.
Morning, Chairman. Thank you very much. I just would like to bring to the committee's attention the action plan that is going with this. This is the first time we've actually presented like this, and what you will find is that we're reviewing currently our performance indicators, and so these indicators will be going into that action plan as well. So it's the first time we've tried to join up the whole of that system. I think what Councillor Wharf has said is entirely right. All of those priorities are cross-cutting. It's not just about adults. It's not just about economic development. It is a whole, I suppose, holistic view of what happens in Dorset. And that's what we really want to be doing with this, is joining everything up and making sure that we are closely monitoring our desire to make things better and make the outcomes better for people who live and work in Dorset.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. And I think it's refreshing to all of us to see that we're adopting a joined-up approach on this. So thank you for that. Any other comments, members? Another hand up on screen. So I'm not very good at keeping up with the screen. Is it Councillor Wharf again? No? Councillor Knox. Sorry, Rebecca.
Sorry, a left hand.
Hi. Hello. Thanks very much for allowing this hybrid meeting. It's been exceptionally helpful. Thank you. I would just like to come back to some language. It's actually in item number 7 on the mission statement, working with the integrated care system. I think the wording "get a better deal for the council" is a little bit misleading, or rather, shouldn't this be more about not a deal, but better outcomes for our residents? Because this isn't just about the council, this is about partnership working, and I think getting a better deal for the council is a little bit clumsy and doesn't really describe what our actual aspirations are. Doesn't sound partnership working if we say it that way. That's my comment on that one.
I think Sam is joining for the item later on, so I think he'll be able to come back on that point at that stage.
Yeah, but if we're going to pass this now, can we revisit that language? I'm not comfortable with it.
I'm happy to take that back and work through that with portfolio holders and just change that language if that's appropriate. Councillor Knox, if that's okay.
Thank you.
I agree with Rebecca. I think that language is quite confrontational when we're hoping to have a partnership with different organisations. It sounds like we're saying the council didn't get a good deal before. You know, we want to be moving forward and embracing this new opportunity, not starting off from a point of view of confrontation.
For me, the word in there does need to be residents, because what are the council if we're not here to represent our residents? So could I ask you to consider that aspect?
Okay, thank you. Rebecca, sorry, have you finished, or do you have any other points before I bring Jill in?
No, I will put my hand down, Chairman, but thank you. That would be really helpful to make that more in partnership, and as Councillor Batstein said, it is for the outcomes rather than the approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Knox. Councillor Haynes.
Yeah, I'm very happy to take that one away. I think it was a work, as I say, work in progress, and that's what's come forward. What we need to do is to make these changes so it is about outcomes. I totally agree with Councillor Knox on that. And whilst we are looking for a good deal, because to be quite frank, we have slightly struggled in the area of adult social care, with working with the integrated system, we will be looking to work in partnership going forward. So very happy to have that conversation and make sure that those words are appropriate.
Thank you, Councillor Haynes. Anybody else got any comments? Okay, we'll move on now to the way it's presented and the format. Does anybody have any views on that? Stunned silence. Councillor Batstein.
If we're looking at the actual diagrams, then certainly prefer the cross-cutting one rather than the trivial pursuits one, as my colleague seemed to describe it. He's doing something else.
I'll take the silence that anyone else doesn't really have a particular view. I mean, personally, I can't get overly precious about how it's presented, providing that it's in a clear format that residents can see, whether it's circles or lines. I'm not precious, but clearly Councillor Miller was.
Chairman, I feel quite strongly, probably too passionate about this, but the more we work with our communities as councillors, the more we realise that things come together. You cannot isolate these things. And I know the segments are within a circle, but even so, to me, that gives a better emphasis on how we work across our priorities.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and moving on. Sorry, what was the third thing you wanted us to...
Just the principle of whether we should have a delivery plan with specific targets sitting alongside the council plan so that yourselves or scrutiny committees can monitor delivery.
Thank you. I think that makes eminent sense that we do have that. Do any members have any comments on that? No, I think it's a given that why wouldn't we have that in place? Okay, so do we need to make a recommendation on this to Cabinet, or is it just go away and get on with it now? No, I think that's it. So, yeah, if you take all those comments on board, and thank you very much, and we look forward to seeing the next part of the progress on it. Thank you. Okay, we move on to, we're going to actually move item 9 to the end. Unfortunately, Sam Crow has been called to another meeting this morning. Will be joining us later on. So if members will indulge us by allowing that to be pushed back in the agenda, that would be appreciated. So we'll move on to item 10, which is adult social care white paper reforms. And John's going to introduce that.
It's actually myself that's going to be introducing on behalf of Vivian, and she's unfortunately unwell today. So good morning, Steve Hughes. I am the Corporate Director for Adult Operations and stand-in DAS for today with Vivian being unwell. As the Overview Committee may well be aware, adult social care has been going through an unprecedented period of change. Central government has been committed to, in its words, fixing social care and putting into place a longer-term set of reforms to ensure that adult social care alongside health is put on an equal footing and a sustainable footing, with the culmination of the Health and Social Care Bill, which became an Act in April 2022. Part of those reforms have a significant legislative change that adult social care and the council needs to be aware of. There is a long lead-in time. We are talking about a series of reforms, and it is multiple reforms that go over a period starting from this year right through to 2025. They are being fed in a number of sections, and what we're proposing to do today is to take you through an overview of what is contained within the reforms paperwork and say how Adult Social Care and Dorset Council will be responding back to the series of changes. So I will hand over to my esteemed colleagues to take us through a slide deck which we're prepared to take it into sections. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. Oh. Peter, yes.
Chairman,
Councillor Wolf wanted to come in before we move on to the kind of meat of this.
Yeah, Chairman, thank you very much for that. First of all, as you know, I spoke to you yesterday. I won't be able to stay for most of the meeting, but this is absolutely critical to the success of both Dorset Council and this particular directorate. So I'm really, really pleased that you are taking the time to look at this in some detail. As an outline statement, we do have massive change going on at the moment in terms of adult social care, the social white paper, the integrated care system, the integrated care board, health and wellbeing boards, changes in their structure and their responsibilities, Care Dorset, and a number of other things. And this is the second substantive discussion we've had with your committee. The first, we talked about how we were going to move forward on that, and today's agenda does present a very comprehensive set of papers which will shape the future of adult social care and is the start of a significantly longer conversation about our collective way through over the next few years. We've already talked about the priorities on the mission statement, and we're going to go through a series of areas that are the responsibility of adult social care, and we're looking to, and this again followed a discussion we had with you, Chairman, we're looking to present what might be summarised as a 5-year plan, following co-production discussion with our partners. And I take Rebecca Knox's point, because we will have to get agreement, because we are not responsible for many of the things that we're talking about. We are a player in the equation rather than leading, and we'll have to work with the new bodies, particularly the ICS, to work out how we can work together effectively and work together without crossing over one another. And this will be co-production over the summer, which will involve talking to your committee again wherever possible. It will involve talking with partners across the piece. It will involve coming back to the November Cabinet with an outline of what we believe is the 5-year plan, which I use as a working title, and coming back to the December Cabinet with a detail of the 5-year plan. And I would just like to make it clear that the 5-year plan, the detail, it is important, but actually the process of getting there is actually probably more important. So I'm absolutely delighted you're taking the time. We are dealing with a whole series of unknowns or not sures, and we're looking forward to you contributing and steering very, very directly the direction we move in, culminating in a 5-year plan, which will then still need to be regularly reviewed, but will set the tone and the template for the directorate moving forward. And can I just thank Steve Vivas for standing in for Vivian, because she's been taken ill with the dreaded COVID at late notice, and she's not very well at all. And thank you, Steve, for stepping in. And I look forward to your committee giving us very significant feedback on this. And as I said to George, the clerk, earlier, please record, because I'm going to have to leave the committee in about half an hour, and I want to be able to come back and hear what's been said to make sure that we do pay due attention to all of the items that you discuss. Thank you very much, Chairman, and happy to answer any questions before you hand back over to Steve Vivas. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wharf. What I should have done just before we moved on to this was just to mention, while some of this will be applicable to Care Dorset, we do not want to get into any discussions today on any of the agenda items moving forwards from here around issues to do with Care Dorset. Okay, so if we can broadly keep away from that, that would be appreciated. I did speak to Councillor Wharf yesterday, and he can be brought back in later if we need to. We have an arrangement to do that, but appreciate he does need to go to other meetings. Does anybody have any questions for Councillor Wharf before he does disappear? Councillor Ezard.
Thank you, Chair, and I do apologise for being late. I didn't realise it was some meeting at 9:30, so apologies. In the start of the paper, it mentions about pending legislative changes. Obviously, this is government. Do you know how long we have to wait for that? That's one question. And it's really good news about how the housing element brought into everything on these, papers. And also, I visited the tech lounge, and I was very impressed with the things going forward. And I presume that the amount of money, they say 300 million, that's coming forward from the government, obviously, we don't know which percentage we're going to get of that. So I do hope that we are putting forward a case for whatever sum we need, for all these, especially the technical things, because they're so expensive. I think the paper sets out things very well, but obviously the government are not giving us enough information yet. So is there any possibility of having any of the questions answered? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So I think probably a lot of that will become apparent in Jonathan's presentation. Councillor Wharf, did you have anything you wanted to respond to Councillor Ezard?
No, thank you, Chairman. I think you're right. Jonathan Price will talk about the timescales. And by the way, the timescales for adult social care reform are still very variable. And whilst we expect them soon, we don't control the government. I'm not sure the government controls the government. And so we cannot with any confidence give a timescale. But what we can say is that we're going to be prepared to listen to the white paper and the legislation as it comes forward. But Jonathan can add further meat to that particular bone. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And Councillor Orford, are you indicating you'd like to speak to Councillor Wharf?
Well, I'd just like to make a couple of remarks on this paper, if it's okay. Starting with paragraph 413, where we mention a care account. And my prediction, I suspect that people at the moment would claim that I've got this completely out of order, but my prediction is that everyone in due time will have a care account. I even have a further sort of thought that many years hence, this care account may become a cradle-to-grave care account. I'd be interested to know if there are any observations to that point.
Chairman, again, I think Jonathan Price will be able to add to this, but in terms of what is sometimes called personalisation, I see this as the way forward. It makes sense because it gives responsibility back to individuals and joins things up. However, I'm not sure how quickly that will be introduced, and I'll leave Jonathan to talk about how we're going to manage that as it is introduced, and bear in mind that, you know, cradle to grave involves children to adults, and there is major problems with the theoretical crossover. So yes, I take Councillor Alford's points very seriously, and I agree. I think it is the way forward, and I'll leave Jonathan to explain the detail of how we're going to work on that to be able to capitalise as and when government introduces new requirements and new guidance. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Well, I think we're in danger of straying into a lot of the stuff that Jonathan's going to cover. So I think without further ado, we'll kick off with Jonathan's presentation. And I think, correct me if I'm wrong, Jonathan, we're going to do a section at a time and then ask for member comments on that. That's what we agreed previously. Okay, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so I will try and pick up on those points from both councillors as we run through. As Peter said, you know, this is fundamental reform for adult social care. It's also part of wider reform of health and social care. And unfortunately, Sam's items later in the running order now, but in some ways we were keen to start with that because that is really the overarching sort of systems space that a lot of the work through adult social care reform, but also the strategies sit in. So hopefully we won't lose that with the change in running order. So the reforms for adult social care are quite extensive and really, you know, are summarised in these 3 points here. So enacting in October 23 funding reforms. Now, many people will remember the implementation of the Care Act in 2014. There was part of that Care Act that wasn't implemented, and that really was around funding reform. So much of this element of reform is akin to that original ambition that was set out in the Care Act, but we are moving forward with that and with funding change that sits beneath that. The next point really is around, you know, innovation and investments in the models of care. So I think it's, you know, well evidenced through the last 2 years and even prior to that care markets and the way that we commission care on behalf of individuals needed to change. Certainly, you know, things like the personalisation agenda, which Peter touched on, were important markers in setting that journey. So running through this ambition really is personalisation and an extension of that. And I'll pick the point up around you know, birth to settled adulthood in that space, because what we do have is an opportunity to do that, and Dorset Council has a programme of work looking at birth to settled adulthood. Within that, one of the key elements will be a joint commissioning plan for children's and adults. So alongside Claire in Children's Services and a range of commissioning colleagues, we are looking at that plan at the moment. But the ambition would be that we'd create a joined up plan and a joined up marketplace. So lots of new services, lots of personalised services, bringing in new types of business that we have seen grow considerably through the pandemic. So lots of small micro providers who do offer a higher degree of personalised care. So that's at the heart of this. And of course that offer you know, goes further and looks at carers, and later in today's agenda we are going to talk about our strategy for carers. So we're picking that up, but you know, these two alongside what will be quite a significant shift for the department and the care market will be a assurance and inspection framework. So this will see sort of similar approach to that taken in children's services through Ofsted, but CQC really taking the whole sector through this new assurance and inspection framework. So those are the three key elements that are in the paper. As I said, the wider health and social care reform, is taking place, and that really looks at joining up people, places, populations, so population health management, and I'm sure Sam, when he's here, will touch on that. So this part of the paper, this part of the agenda really looks at heart of care, and it's the 10-year vision for transformation with those three overarching aims that drop down into objectives. Now, these objectives are very familiar if you are familiar with personalisation, so people have choice and control and are supported to live independent lives. People can access outstanding quality and tailored personalised support, and people find adult social care fair and accessible. So those are the key objectives through this reform. So these are the elements of the programme that we've developed. So over the last 2 months, we have been constructing a programme, and I'm joined by Christopher Gilly to my right, who has been the person responsible for designing that programme, because this is a major piece of work over 2 years. So it is a piece of work that we will be taking through to the Transformation Board, because it will require some investment. Some investment we expect to come from government, but at this stage we're not 100% clear on what that looks like. What we are clear on is that we need to deliver this within a set of milestones that are predetermined. So we will be working corporately to support that. And many bits of the council have already been engaged on this change, because it isn't just change for our department. This change will have an impact across many of our services and that interaction with members of the public. So the first part of this, and I'll pause at the end of this slide, really is that innovation and investments in new models of care. So what's required from the government? Well, making every decision about care a decision about housing. Now, this is quite significant. As adult social care practitioners, we've talked about this for many years. The two are very, very linked. We are a directorate that includes housing, so we're in a fortunate position working alongside Andrew to have housing linked to our work. So it's not just about adult social care, it's about the council, but it also has a big play around housing. And that's important because we know that a lot of people's choices about their care start with where they live, and whether that be in the community, in their own home, new forms of housing that we will need to supply, such as extra care and supported living in the future, or residential and nursing homes, which are people's homes for that period of time as well. So it is really important, and it's key in our approach, and hopefully you'll see that mirrored in the strategies that we're bringing through in the next item. Another key point is the use of technology. Now, really pleased to hear so many of you have visited the Tech Lounge, and Dorset Council is winning some very positive accolades for the work that's already underway. But we need to build on that. So, the technology is really important to supporting people who potentially are in our care, having had a Care Act assessment, but potentially also could be on the edge of care, so not necessarily known to us receiving services. So, linking people up with good services through technology is one aspect, but also, the ability to allow people technology such as wearables, which can perhaps in many ways predict things like falls, and as we know, for our older people, falls are often the point at which the care journey starts. So anything that we can do with technology ahead of that is very valuable. And the reform talks to that. It talks to building a system that can develop and adapt to new ways of providing care, but at scale. We saw through the pandemic some of the frailties around our care provision, and we do have many small providers. So building resilience in a market where we have small providers is very important. So that is a key bit here. I've touched on that prevention agenda, but health promotion is also very important. So we do know that we will be getting some funding. So there's an investment of around 300 million over the next 3 years to deal with that housing and care piece. But we're expecting that there are also avenues that we can access through various funding bodies to build new housing. So that is the requirement. What we've done so far, largely, we've planned. So our strategy set out what we will do over the next 5 years. So those strategies that we're going to talk to in a while, but also the work that is already underway through the Better Lives programme, which does start to link housing options with different groups of our population. So I'll pause at that point for any questions.
Thank you, Jonathan. Does anybody have any comments? Councillor Lugg.
Yeah, I'm not clear how this fits into our local plan. We're talking about building housing and accommodation, but how are we feeding into the local plan on this?
Yes, so through our modelling of requirements, we're able now to, by place, look at what sort of extra care housing we'll require over the coming years, and we are feeding that into those plans, working alongside Andrew and that better buildings programme that's already up and running. That's an aspect for older people, but also for our supported living accommodation for people of working age. Again, we're able to model the requirements there and feed that in. So that links.
Councillor Rezard.
Thank you. As I mentioned before, I think the element of bringing housing into this is so important because very often it's a stumbling block when you get to need assisted housing. There isn't any, or it's just not adaptable. So having projects like the former middle school at Wareham, which is one of these assisted housing schemes, is very welcome, and I think we can't get enough of these. I mean, people want to stay in their own homes. They don't want to particularly go into care homes, and I think that if we can provide this with actual carers close by that actually also got living accommodation in these areas, which I think is provided for in this case at the middle school, and I think there's a similar one that's being built already at Bridport, isn't there? So I think that if some of the members could go and visit the Bridport one, I would really welcome that and see what actually is being integrated into that, because I think it's important for us as members to actually know that this change is being completely integrated into the new care system and the ideology. And I think, using that and putting in as much of the potential digital technology as well as you go along, rather than retrofit, is a better place to go. So I think that, I should be looking at great interest on taking this forward. And I think, the more the better, the quicker. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, I completely agree. I think the opportunity where we build new housing as well to make sure that our tech and our digital runs through it is not to be underestimated. And things have moved forward hugely in the last few years. We used to talk about extra care housing, having significant benefits for GP practice. And it was very much in the abstract. I think the last 2 years, virtual wards, virtual consultations, have all allowed that to move forward. Perhaps in the past, people were a little bit worried about, embracing technology in helping them maintain their health and in terms of accessing services. But I think that has definitely shifted. So we will be looking to maximise that. And the stuff that you've seen in the tech lounge, is a fraction of what we will be able to put into some of these new homes.
Thank you. Councillor Alford.
Thank you. I suppose I've just been reminded that housing has an impact not only on care, but also other things. And I think in particular of climate change. And if we think about the recent changes to building regulations, which encourage better air circulation in homes, not only does that have a positive impact in terms of combating climate change, but it is also good for the health of the residents as well.
Yes, thank you, Councillor. When Peter said that we'd matched up our work to 10 of the mission statements, he was correct. So, I mean, certainly climate change, the fact that we will be building new homes is one element. And, where we build them, we will look to build accommodation for staff as well, because, workforce, digital and tech, all together, in the community is sort of, that's the aim of the work we do. And when we do that, we also have a positive around climate change, and we will reduce travel in the delivery of care. We will reduce travel in the delivery of many of our health services going in, because people can work on a location footing. So there's lots of opportunity for us to influence the climate change through the work of the department in the next 5 years.
Thank you. Councillor Knox.
Hello. There are people who are far more experienced in the world of planning than me, but what I would just like to hear is that actually across the council, particularly in our planning policy area, that we have got the commitment that the type of accommodation that we are seeking to build into links to housing and accommodation from the requirements of these, whoever these residents might be who have that need, that commitment has been given priority. It might not be in all cases, but so often we see land up for development, which would be ideal, absolutely ideal for the type of accommodation that we're looking for, but it gets trumped by the private sector. And I get that people need to make profits on land, but we do need some sort of pecking order that ensures that we have the ability to use land. It might be that we only have the ability to put in this principle of priority people first on public sector land that might be going onto the market. But I would just like to hear that we do have that commitment in planning policy wherever we can possibly do that, or have it transferred to the local authority. Because otherwise we will just keep on getting prime pieces of land being taken up with second homes and homes which are not affordable to anybody who meets the categories of people we're talking about now. So are our planning policy folk in this committee this morning to answer these questions?
Hi, Councillor. No, our planning colleagues are not. But this is I think, as said at the start, this is fundamental reform for adult social care. It will be a project that will go through the council's transformation programme, and we will be looking for assistance and resource to deliver it, because it is much broader than just adult social care. So what I can tell you is we've already met with John Selgren's team to talk about the reforms that we are expected to deliver, and this paper sets out. So at this stage, we're very, very early on, but we've set the expectation that we need to join these things up. So I think much more work to do in that space, but clearly a recognition through the reform about the importance of housing and the priority of that housing towards, what is almost 30%, if you take the older people's category, of our population in Dorset Council. So that's where we are at this stage, but we are quite early into this work, and hence to bring it here. So we will definitely take your question away and have that conversation with Matt Piles and his team. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think there's quite a strong message around the planning, and certainly I wanted to bring up the building of care homes, particularly where due to proximity to Heathland, we're unable to build houses where houses need to be built, so we pop up a care home where there isn't necessarily a need, and there may be needs in other parts of the county. Certainly in the east of the county, we suffer with those kind of restraints. So I think a strong message from this committee is to go back and say, actually, let's have some input into the planning side of things. Any other member comments before we let Jonathan carry on with the next stage? Councillor Wolf has just put his hand up.
Thank you, Chairman. I had quite a long conversation with Councillor Tony Ferrari, whose portfolio includes assets, and he is absolutely aware of what Councillor Knox and what you are talking about, particularly in terms of use of buildings where we're not sure what we're going to do with them. And he has got a process whereby it is quite reasonable for people to put forward a business plan for what to do with that building location, etc., which may not be the maximum profit outcome, but will provide a social value, and social value will be taken into account. I'm slightly hesitant speaking on behalf of my cabinet colleague, but as I spoke to him about this relatively recently, I'm relatively comfortable. You might want to get Councillor Ferrari to your committee to describe that in more detail, but I can assure you that there is a mechanism for making sure that social value of buildings and properties and locations is a factor in their future use. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. That's really useful. I think there would be value in bringing Councillor Ferrari to a future meeting. We'll let you carry on, Jonathan.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the next part of the sort of key programme of change. So this innovations, investment, models of care. It's moved on. Sorry, it's not moved on, has it? Actually, I'm going to hand over to Steve for this one.
A slick double act, I think. So, as John set out at the very beginning, one of the other major reform pieces that we see coming forward is a fundamental shift in the way that adult social care supports itself, but assures itself of the quality and the delivery that goes on within the entirety of the sector. John done a good parallel with the model that Ofsted are responsible for of the inspection of children's services. The Care Quality Commission, CQC, will be taking on a responsibility for the inspection of adult social care departments in addition to what's previously been described as provider locations. So, for example, care homes, domiciliary care providers, GP surgeries and hospitals come April 23, they will then start to implement an inspection regime of both adult social care departments, but for noting also the wider ICS, integrated care systems, of the same timeframes. It is quite a fundamental shift, and to put this into context, the last time that adult social care departments were formally inspected was circa 12 years ago. So it has been some time that adult social care have not had a formal regulation of its performance, but has relied upon a system of sector-led improvement, i.e. ourselves being responsible for our own quality and ensuring that what we do is right and fit and proper. So quite a fundamental shift. Where this has meant change for us, and as we start to see the work that we need to do over the next 12 months to get us round to 2023, but then the further 24 months to get us round to the formal start of an inspection regime in 2025, is moving to the place that our children's colleagues do ever so well in being ready for the formalisation of an inspection regime, but also to have the fundamentals of a external regulatory quality assurance framework that supports our own delivery. But then it will be helpful to provide back to the council and councillors in particular in the way that we work and those measures that we have that will be recorded and demonstrated on a national platform of the performance and relative performance to other local authorities of our adult social care department. It is set in the context of the wider reform. So as John has touched on, this is still in the context of providing a good quality, outstanding care at scale across our entire community. It is about prevention, it is about health promotion, and it is about technology being an enabler for allowing people to stay in their own homes for longer, independently of health and social care having to come into contact with them. And then this is supported again by some front runners. So some local authorities are already going through the routes of being mock inspected in preparation for doing so. And we are watching with interest what's coming through. But we are stepping ourselves into the footing, the battle readiness to be able to be ready for the inspections as they come through next year. So again, I will pause and open for questions.
Thank you, Steve. Do any members have any comments or questions? Councillor Wolf, is that an old hand up or do you want to speak? Sorry, that sounded very bad, didn't it?
Sorry, yes, it's an old hand, I apologise.
Councillor Knox.
Hi there. So when there's an inspection regime, we have been very much used to inspections just looking at one department. We have very much at Dorset want to work across the whole local authority. Will the inspection regime just look at the Adult Social Care Directorate, or will it, and I would say will it very helpfully, look at actually the relationship that adult social care has with not only directorates within the council itself, but with partners outside? So, for instance, getting back to housing and planning again, if there is an area where that is not succeeding or doesn't have the right type of priority or policy in place, which actually is in the hands of another part of the council, will that inspection highlight that? I hope so.
So, Councillor Knox, a wonderful question, which we are ourselves waiting with interest to see some of the detail which supports the inspection regime. And as you'd expect, the Care Quality Commission is not yet giving full information with regards to what will or will not be within the inspection regime. But what we're already hearing, so some of the high-level messages that we are seeing from the regulator and also from the Department of Health and Social Care, is that they will be looking at the interface points that adult social care has. Particularly what we have heard so far is with our colleagues in children's services and also with our colleagues in both the acute health sector, primary care health sector and the emergent ICS. So our expectation is it will not be in isolation, but will be across the wider gambit of activity that adult social care is asked to do. But it will be in the context that the ICS will be inspected themselves for the first time. So the ICS will be monitored on its own performance across the wider determinants of health and its interface with social care. With the specifics on the housing and planning, I imagine from knowledge with the Ofsted regime, they have what's described as key lines of inquiries, CLOEs. They have points where they effectively pick up a thread and start to follow through particular points. So I would imagine they will be given the authority to understand problem points within adult social care. And if, as is through the reform work, clearly, housing is identified as one of those key determinants of people's longer-term health and positive outcomes, I would be very surprised if they do not in some ways look at housing as an element of people's care delivery.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all, Rebecca, or not?
That was great to hear. I think if I was going to come back, and I will now because you've asked, is that actually when we are engaging with government, whichever department, is that we proactively push the requirement that other areas are brought in and not leave them for another inspection regime which might have priorities. So I would say that I hope we really encourage a really good dig down into areas where there isn't, where there are blocks to our own requirement to deliver and transform. Thanks very much, Chairman.
So I can come back on the final point on that, Councillor Knox. Like any good inspection regime, we will be given the opportunity to sell our story, to tell our story about how we as an adult social care department are performing ourselves. And to some extent, that gives Dorset Council its own opportunity to bang its own drum, to say, actually, this is the things we are proud of, or areas where we know that we wish to do better in. So to some extent, the inspection regime, if it parallels the Ofsted regime of inspection, will be the fact of understanding our own story and understanding the data and the evidence that supports that story. So that is part of our planning, and part of our narrative will be about building the Dorset picture and the Dorset narrative that supports the inspection regime.
Thank you. Are there any other member comments or move on? Okay, we'll let you move on. Oh, apologies, Councillor Alford.
This is a new point. Do you want to take it now or later?
Is it relevant to the...
It's on this paper. It's about the fair cost of care exercise. And I suppose I have two questions there. One of which is, when we are taking procurement issues, do we need to reflect on the requirements for information in the future on this topic and allow for that in our commissioning plans? Secondly, if there are cases where we need to determine the fair cost of care and there isn't any of that forward-looking information that would help us, whether we would get somebody like internal audit to look at this and certify the answer to the question.
So this was part of the presentation, but I can flick to it now and perhaps answer the question and do this section next, if that's okay.
Unless we just continue with your presentation, if Councillor Alford's points aren't covered,
come back.
We can come back if you're happy with that, Councillor Alford.
Yep. Thank you.
So back onto me for the funding reforms. So this section is probably one that causes us both most concern and professional curiosity. So as John described at the original outset of the Care Act, when it came in 2012 into 2014, there was a very clear commitment about funding and longer-term sustainable funding for adult social care. We had a number of external commissioned reports, including Dilnot and others, who gave a very clear steer about how funding for adult social care should be put into place. And we have also had the current government being very clear about wanting to make a sustainable position for longer term funding. This is one where we are doing the greatest investigation at this point in time into the legislative changes. And when we take some of the particular factors of the demographics of Dorset, the rurality, the demographics, the ageing population, and where we have, as John's described, the difficulty in both sourcing care and the market sustainability, this is one of the ones that we are most clearly wishing to get a very clear position on as quickly as we're able to do so. As councillors have indicated, one of the clear requirements of the funding reforms is around a care account. This is a metering of people's ability to pay and also the maximum amount that anyone will ever be charged against their care account, effectively the amount of money that they would pay towards the cost of their own care over the course of their journey through the care pathways. This is extensionally a very significant change for the way that we are currently working, where people would be expected to pay for all of their care. You would have heard it described as self-funders previously, up until the point in time that they hit a threshold, and then would be coming to the local authority for funding from that point onwards. This changes it fundamentally 180 degrees, in that anyone, irrespective of their funding situation or their own assets, will only ever pay the maximum of £86,000. That is the cap on people's care costs. So for those local authorities that have high net worth individuals, that have a range of individuals that have high property prices, for example with Dorset, we are thinking that this may disproportionately affect Dorset, and we are working through some of the financial impacts. And as John described earlier on, this is not just adult social care business within Dorset Council. This touches on our corporate colleagues, particularly in finance and in income. It touches on the wider council in regards to the amount of individuals that will be knocking on the door of Dorset Council wanting to start the metering of their care as they start to go through their own care journey, be that if they're receiving domiciliary care in their own homes or starting to consider entering places like extra care or residential or nursing care. We also have another significant change in the way that the local authority will be asked to, or can be asked, to broker and arrange care on behalf of everyone who is looking to have care and support delivered to them. So previously that is not the requirement of the Care Act, but is being expanded out. So there may well be a wider range of duties that fall on the local authority and the activity that goes with. As John will pick up on the next slide, one of the major changes that we also see coming through is the changes to the marketplace, to the care providers themselves, be that residential care or daycare or domiciliary care. Whereas we, as Dorset Council, is currently a significant part, but not the totality of the purchaser of care, we can see that shifts being a significant change towards Dorset Council being the predominant purchaser of care across the Dorset footprint, and the change in the dynamics of our relationship. The third and final point that I will touch on the funding reforms is the workforce changes. So currently we have a workforce capacitated both internally and externally to deal with a level of demand that has been relatively steady for a relatively long period of time. We see over the next 2 years or so a significant change in the way that we as the council will be having to meet the demands that we're coming through, particularly in those individuals that will be asking for the brokerage of the care, the financial assessment of the care, and also the social work activity that will support people's assessment of needs. So we are currently mapping that out, and that is part of the work that we will do over the implementation period to make sure that we are ready, fit and ready to be able to deliver against the requirements as we come through with part of this. So I will pause again and open up for questions on this section on the funding reforms.
Councillor Ezard.
Thank you, Chairman. This does sound as if it's a fundamental change, and what happens, you know, a global thing, if people have exceeded their, you know, cap, as it were, does that mean that the local authority has to pick up the rest? I mean, for the personal care? And of course, when we're talking about personal care here, we're not talking about some of the you know, their housing costs from the point of view of their rent or anything like that. Can you actually, you know, tease that out a bit more? Because personal care to some people mean different things for personal care to other people. So can you just say what that personal care entails on like a daily basis? Say, give us an example. But also, you know, the churches, you know, the side effect of all of this is that it seems like everybody needs to be assessed, and I understand that that was one of the criteria that needs to be done. How are you going to cope with assessing all of the people that need to be done by the date that's mentioned here? It says October of this year, which I thought it was next year that was the date that this was being brought forward. So what is the actual date when these assessments should be done? Thank you.
So thank you, Councillor Izzard. Just a couple of things to unpack out of that one, and some quite large items. So I'll start with the first one. So we are looking with interest through the legislation that's come forward before us. It is very clear about the cap, and your first question about people going past the cap. That is part of the digital solution to people's metering. So if you think of a kind of an account, effectively, of people's care, will need to be established. And there is some national front runners of a digital solution for that, which we are working both with the front runner authorities that have already started down this route, but with our own current range of solution partners. So, for example, we have a case management system called Mosaic. We are working with them and other partners to say, how do we implement a module to establish someone having a care account set up that they can access? And where we've been very clear about this touches all parts of the council, we don't want to do this in isolation. So we have a one council approach of having a corporate front door and a customer portal is the language that our colleagues in corporate services have about people coming in. We are trying to make sure that our corporate account, our customer front door, can also have people's metering accounts, so they can see their own metering as they start to go through with this. So we're trying to future-proof any of the work that we go through. Picking up the other question about, well, what does that cap include? It is very clear that it is just people's care requirements, not anything further. So housing and secondary sundry items is the legislative language that they use, is not included. So the metering is against people's care requirements only. And that is part of the understanding that we're trying to make through, and working with our comms colleagues to make sure that our residents of Dorset are very clear about that. There is an expectation that central government will be putting out a campaign around awareness raising and an information piece, but we are really clear that actually we want to support our residents of Dorset to understand what is and what isn't included in those expectations that people will have about that metering. But it is very clear it's about people's care needs only, not housing, not sundries, not living costs. It's about people's care needs as the metering going through. You're right in the case that there is a big requirement to make sure that we assess everyone that comes through. And to put that into proportion, we know that between now and the start of the metering coming into place, so for next year, we are needing to get through everyone who is currently in receipt of care. And we think that's about the same number of people that we're currently supporting, if not a little bit more. So that's quite a big ask of an adult social care department, which is just coming out of the ravages of COVID and has been working very hard to be able to manage our demand that has been coming through both our hospital and community front door. And if we were doing it in the way that we've always done it, we would never be able to do so. So again, we're moving back to that digital and technology solution to be able to manage this demand coming through. And to some extent, people will be able to self-serve. And we've already seen this come through with regards to the front runner authorities. So there's 7 local authorities up and down the country who have started early to start to do the metering and the care cap implementation. One of the very clear advice pieces that is coming out about having a very good, very strong digital solution for our residents to be able to self-serve, to be able to put in that information about their own finances and to start that metering off. That will take out a significant proportion of our demand to meet the people that we know are coming over the hill towards us with this, the implementation of this. Where I will be protecting my valuable social work resource is to make sure that there's people that need extra help, or where actually they've got complex either financial or care situations that need some assistance to be able to understand the bits coming through. That'll be my requirement to make sure that our workforce is ready to help manage some of that, and also to make sure that the brokerage solution is there for those people that need our help in that area. That's how we're currently working it through, but as part of our reforms planning, we will have a really clear piece around both the funding reforms and the workforce response that we will need to have in place for that.
Thank you. Do you want to come back, Councillor Azard? Sorry.
Ask and say, with this, obviously you're setting this up, the criteria for how it's going to run, and obviously the staff are going to be really hard put to do that. Is it possible that we as members get to see this, because we, like your comms section, are going to be asked this on a daily basis in the future, especially if it's out there in the media, and from reports from the government. So I think it's important that the members know what the criteria is, so that it is understood. So whether we have a briefing or whatever it is, or a paper or something that actually gives us, as soon as you can, get that together, that would be really good. Thank you.
Councillor, of course we'll do that, and we've just started to see some good practice examples come through from central government with regards to what it might mean for a variety of different people. We will collate that into a briefing document or an information document to circulate around.
Thank you. I feel that probably a members' briefing for this committee would be appropriate when you're ready to present that information. Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chairman. Just on a quick point on page 114, just under the care cap, where it just says about more generous means tested support for anyone. I just wondered if you could just, if possible, expand on that. What would that actually more detail? Because it's only just, it's very brief. It is. So I just wondering if possible, if you can expand on that for me, please.
So I'll respond back initially, and I might bring my colleague in, Chris, in a second, but we are trying to understand. So ourselves are responding back to the legislation as it's changing. Part of that generous means testing is actually currently the reform, the current legislation as it stands under the Care Act is very clear about the help and support that people are or are not eligible to. With regards to the change, as we start to go into the Health and Care Act and the funding reforms that sit underneath it, it is lifting that threshold from 24,000 up to 100,000. And then also then the means testing that sits under it has a slightly different level of eligible or non-eligible items that sit in it, so that bit's going on. I don't know the detail, but I can come back to you directly with a kind of slightly greater briefing on the information that sits within that, if that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you for answering that. I would be very grateful if we could just get a bit more detail on that, because as I said, it's quite brief as it shows there, and it's just, I think really we need to just, as members, I think we need to see a bit more of the nitty-gritty stuff, I think, Chairman, on what that does really detail about more generous means on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And if you could circulate that amongst all the committee, that would be appreciated. John, did you want to come back? Sorry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I mean, I think Peter probably wants to come in as well, but this is very much the first, outing of the reform to give you an idea of what the 2-year journey looks like. I would absolutely anticipate that we'll be coming back at regular points to update on this programme of work. The important thing for today is that you're aware of some of the key milestones, the fact that we have established a programme to work towards those, but actually in terms of some of the detail in these strands of the programme, we are waiting on further clarity from government. So it is going to be sort of a period of 2 years where we'll probably be unpacking and coming back to explain the detail as we receive it. So I think we'll follow that approach.
And if I can just follow up, and one of the major positives that we are seeing is that the Trailblazer sites are starting to unearth some of the practice questions. Some of the questions that you're asking us is actually what we are seeing as part of the Trailblazer sites, that practical implementation of the legislation and the learning and the delivery of such is coming back. So although we have undertaken to do briefings, of course we will, it might be in conjunction with waiting to see what we see from the briefing reports coming out of the Trailblazer sites, because that way we can probably be much more informed to be able to answer in some greater level of detail.
Thank you. Councillor Wolf, were you coming specifically on this item or just generally?
No, I was coming specifically on this item. Because, and thank you to Steve and Jonathan for presenting what you might call the systemic issues, but there are some political issues as well that you need to be aware of. It is not clear that government will fund all of the additional work that they're asking us to do, and it is also not clear because we might be more adversely impacted because of our more aging population than other authorities. So there is an issue about this adding to our budget, and I've spoken with Gary Suttle, the finance portfolio holder. We recognise we're not at a position where we can identify what the delta is, but the fact is there may well be a delta, and whenever you have an increase in a budget somewhere, you have to reduce the budget elsewhere. So this is not, well, this is, you might call it a zero-sum game, because if you give more away in one area, you've got to take it away in another. So there is something to be looked at in this particular area. And while the officers are quite rightly dealing with the systemic requirements, we, as a council, will have to deal with the budgetary implications as and when they become clearer. It is my view that there will be an additional cost to Dorset Council. Although I'd be grateful if Jonathan or Steve wanted to add anything on that. But I thought it important you understood there was a political angle as well as a systemic angle. Thank you.
So, Councillor Wolf, thank you. Yes, that is the secondary part of this that we are mapping out, is the financial impact of these legislative changes. You'll be aware that there was a very recent change in the taxation on national insurance, so an increase of 1.25%, which has been earmarked and ring-fenced for health and social care. That starts to be fed in over the next 5 years, initially to health on health recovery and elective surgery recovery. But then as we start to go into years 2, 3 and 4, we start to see a small element of that building coming into adult social care to mark against the impact of some of these funding reforms. What we're trying to do is marry that up. As Councillor Wolf has described it, is it a zero-sum or is it something else? And that deficit point is one we are looking with some degree of interest, and our colleagues in finance and colleagues around the table are very much trying to understand that now as we start to interpret the legislation as we go through with this.
Thank you. Councillor Lugg.
We appear to have strayed into the actual mechanics. Is there another slide on that before I ask questions on that? No, okay. So I think key to this is how we communicate with our residents. And I think we need to start now with changes are coming, gather your information together. We don't, very clear comms in very clear English, basically. There are a number of things in here that concern me, stuffing, for instance, but also the fact that all these people are going to be coming together at a point with their information. How are we going to prioritise that? Because there will be people that have already reached their 86,000, and I'm assuming they're entitled to then have their care costs? Or does it start from that point and they have to build it up? There will be people who are under the new rate of 30,000 already, and we could get into a situation where we're going to have to pay people back if we don't assess them quickly enough. That's two things I can think of off the top of my head. Also, you know, the mean everybody's going to want new accounts are going to be coming into play. Who are we going to prioritise in terms of, you know, getting this through our system?
So, Councillor Logg again, another lovely set of questions to unpack with some of this. No, absolutely. And this is, to some extent, it shows the complexity that, as an adult social care department, we're trying to unpack ourselves and understanding those touch points and interface points that are across the board. That communication plan, I suppose that's your first and probably most important point in this, is absolutely right. And what we're trying to do is to start mapping out who do we need to let know when and what information going through, not in the context of holding information back. So, for example, our adult social care workforce and our health workforce that sits alongside us, we're still trying to do the briefing and the information for them to bring them up to speed, to know actually they will be our link points quite often with our residents and our people who are coming through to talk to us on a regular basis. Our customer service points, so our colleagues in libraries and Dorset's Connect, who are people taking our first call, we need to do a briefing plan for them. But you are absolutely right. Just after that is then how do we communicate really well with our residents, the range, breadth and depth of the changes that are coming over and what they will be able to expect or to some extent not expect from Dorset Council as we start to go through into the reform work and the changes in the legislation going forward. So you're absolutely right. That is cited on us, and part of our project team are looking at that communications plan as we start to roll that out. You had some specifics about the funding mechanics. We ourselves, as I've said, we are still trying to understand ourselves the practicalities of some of that. Our understanding so far is that it will not be retrospective. So if you've effectively hit started to go down underneath your 86,000, it won't be retrospectively put back in from the point that the legislation changes. With regards to the change on the upper threshold, we deal with that today already with people who reach the 24,000 threshold as it stands today. So that is a small shift, but a shift that we are well sighted on and expecting to come through. And that is part of that financial planning that we're doing today to say, well, really, what is the financial impact on Dorset Council of these changes and when does it come in? So, for example, people who are going through their current assets heading towards the 86, we know we need to assess them, but it will be less impetus to do so as opposed to those individuals that are just coming down towards that 86 threshold as we start to see it. So we're mapping out some of those touch points and when we need to go through, but we can't underestimate the size and scale of the challenge that we have coming through in this.
Thank you. And waiting very patiently in the wings, Councillor Knox.
Thank you, Chairman. Actually, I think some of my colleagues have picked up some of the points I was going to raise, but I'd just like to expand on the one about communication and what Councillor Lugg's just said. This is a sort of generational opportunity. Traditionally, we've communicated with people who do need adult social care. We need to be communicating with their friends and family. So we need to actually start to put into motion the conversation, dare I say, if I say an age, someone's going to get upset, but that say that the children of those who are coming into adult social care need, I would love to have understood what care meant. You know, somebody said, what does care mean? This is what it means. Where do I go? I would love to have known that a long time ago. And I think this is a really, really good opportunity to put that work in. And that comes on to my second point, which is the ability for whether it's our staff or who we use to actually provide some of this, dare I say it, I mean, you're not allowed to unless you're a credited, regulated financial advisor, but people who do understand the finance system, so often I get people who have said to me, I don't understand why my dad's pension has been raided and it now has to pay for the nursing home or the care home, and where does that work? And, you know, I never know whether it's actually it's for citizens' advice who don't quite get there, or whether it's for our staff who don't, or whether I say go and get your own financial advisor. This is a really good moment to put that into place. It will cost though, so I'm really pleased to hear that you're looking at what this is going to cost, and I would build in a whole, almost a workforce that can deal with some of these, what can be very complicated and very short and long-term effects adversely on whole families.
Councillor Knox, I don't think there's an answer needed in any of that, but we agree fully. So that communication piece and both then the kind of wider support networks of where both individuals and their families can go to get that information is absolutely part of our thinking. So we recognise that actually a lot of people do not wish to or do come to adult social care when they start their journey into care. So, for example, places like doctor surgeries, social venues, libraries are going to be venues where we will try to get information regarding these changes out to for those touch points that people have with us as a council, but can start to do good future planning for their care journeys for either themselves or their family members that they might be supporting going through. So, yeah, we wholeheartedly agree, and we're doing that as part of our thinking.
Okay, I don't think we've got any other member comments on this part, so on to the next slide, please.
Thank you, Chair. So this is the section of the programme that's going to look at market reform and plays to the previous overview item really around the fair cost of care. So I think I set out at the last meeting that, you know, we have embarked on this journey early, and we have started the exercise with our providers using external consultancies to come in to provide an evidence base which then informs both our uplifts that have been made this year, but also the planning for our budget for next year. Now, there is some funding that is coming down, but I think it's fair to say at this stage it is quite shy of the sort of numbers that we have seen through the exercise to date. So, as Councillor Wharf indicated, you know, we are playing that back into the corporate centre. We are having conversations about that, because this is a journey that will take us to 2025. Where at that point we will be expected, as will all local authorities, to be paying what is deemed the fair cost of care. And of course we're in difficult times with cost of living crisis. We are seeing you know, data that we took 6 months ago, which is probably out of date at the moment. We've took it because the economy and the world is changing quite quickly at the moment. But let's hope that will not always be the case as we work towards 2025. So it's quite a lot of work that we've already done. I think the key point that I'd pull out here is the conversation internally about what it might cost, but also back into government. So one of the reasons that we embarked on the journey early was that we could be one of those local authorities with a set of demographics that was able to say, actually, we've done this and it looks like it will cost this, and here's the evidence base. So that conversation is happening at the moment, and it's a conversation that will continue. So we will do the exercise again. So we've got more up-to-date information, building on what we already have, but we are already indicating what we think this will cost moving forward to get us to that 2025 piece. So there are a couple of key milestones here. That market sustainability plan, which will come here, is due in October. So that will be quite a key document. And then there are various other milestones along the way. I'm going to flick on to the next slide at this point, because whilst you've seen a lot of text, this next bit is really to demonstrate a little bit visually about some of the challenge we've got as this programme progresses. Can you do the next slide? So we've talked about the different work streams here. So this would be the first of those, fair cost and market sustainability piece. So what you can see there is the green arrows, and you can't read the detail, but the idea was that we gave you sort of where we are on the timeline. So the timeline's running up till September 2024, the end of September, September 2024. And we're obviously at this stage in the green area. So we have at this stage conducted fair cost of care exercise. We are building the market sustainability plans, and we are planning our budgets. We will pull that through into the discussions about the MTFP process here, and submit by February 2023. We're developing our commissioning strategies to support this work, and we are going to come on to those later today. But you can see in the next phase from January 2023 that we, in the orange arrow, that we have quite a lot more work to do around developing additional capacity, organisational capacity to deliver some of this. Now, Steve's already alluded, key to our approach is digital. So we have a good digital resource in the council. Our digital business partners very linked into the work that we're doing. And given the workforce market at the moment, one of our key assumptions is that we will try to do as much of the work that the extra burdens that come to us through a digital approach. So there's a lot of work that we need to do ahead of July 2023 to look at systems, but also that end-to-end process of contact that people have with the council. Because, as I've said already, it's not just that contact with adult social care, information and advice that people can have, the access to self-serve can all come quite a lot earlier. So there's that piece there, but then there's also the blue arrow which runs throughout, which is really the implementation of the strategies that we're going to talk about today. So this is just an indication really of the sort of scale of the work and the time frame. And the next slide, please. So this one, again, looks at what we've already done, what's underway in terms of the funding reform, and we've touched on that today. But again, you can see, there's a huge amount of work for us to do, really, from July of this year up until March 23 to ensure that we're in the right place for this. We've got early self-assessment around the introduction of the care cap from April 23, and then we've got from October 23 onwards the ongoing delivery of assessments for self-funders, and the systems will need to be in place for that period of time. So that's quite a small window in terms of delivering quite a big systems change that will support our information and advice and contact strategies. And then the final slide really just talks to the first slide Steve presented, which is that assurance framework. And again, I think that the thing to note here is we don't have a huge amount of information on what this needs to look like. So really we are working to that baselining requirement in April 23 at this stage, but then we will be looking at what information flows to inform the rest of the programme and that work stream. So that's just an overview of some of the key aspects of the reform, some of the sort of timelines that we're working to, and our initial approach. I'll pause there, and that's the end of the slide pack. So thank you.
Thank you, John, and thank you from me for making those last 3 slides less busy than the first one you showed me last week. So that's appreciated, and I think that's for the benefit of members. Do any members have any comments? Councillor Rezard.
Thank you. I've realised that the presentation slides don't meet with the paper, and they're obviously updated. So is there, a chance that they can be forwarded to us? If you look at that plan on there at the moment, that doesn't marry up with what we've got on this screen, not with me anyway. So I think they're a bit updated to what they are. Is the form? It's slightly different, or have you updated the paper since? Sorry? Sorry? Oh, sorry.
So as Mike alluded, in the original pack, it was a very, very busy slide where we've got all of the different work streams together. So for the purpose of presenting today, we stripped them back. So if you add those 3 slides back together, you get what's in the paper. But we will of course forward the details today. We just use the deck really as a sort of an aid to try and walk through key messages. But it is the same, just broken down.
Thank you. I did specifically ask that when I had a chairman's briefing that they did split that down, because I felt that slide was too busy to present to this. But assured there was nothing new going to be introduced in the presentation, and I don't believe there has been. Councillor Alford.
I was going to say, can I come back a moment? Because actually what they have done on the slight breakdown is to say how far we've got so far, and not on this particular slide, but previous one, saying how far we've got so far, and like extra breakdown to what's in the paper, unless I've missed a further paper. But yes, so I thought that was very useful to read it up there rather than try and look at it on here and I'm not finding it. So that where you've got so far on one side and then not so far on the other side, that's quite useful. If it's possible to have those extra things, that would be really good, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Alford.
Yes, thank you. And I support the request for copies of the slides, please, because they are exceptionally busy and not possible to read. I just really want to comment about October this year, when we effectively submit data, and it's the start of a dialogue. And I think it was Councillor Wolf who's already made the comment that there needs to be utter consistency between the two. Otherwise, our case, such as it is, would fall by the wayside. We don't want that to happen. What I am acutely conscious of, especially when it comes to estimating costs, that it is very easy to understate them or underestimate them. And I think we just have to be conscious that anything that we submit in terms of cost, we are going to be held to account to, because this information will be taken as gospel effectively. So we just need to make sure that we get everything precise and supportable by data.
Yeah, I mean, just to reassure you, we're alive to that fact, and as I said in the presentation, things are moving quite quickly at the moment. So it will be both a sort of data drop, so there'll be the factual information, but there is also a dialogue. So it's not. The government departments are trying to future-proof the information we give them by having the conversation with us as well about local changes. So to reassure you on that factor.
Thank you. If members haven't got any other comments, I'd like to thank the officers for a very comprehensive report, and members for some very, very good input onto that. Can I have agreement that we note the proposed reforms and we endorse the approach being taken? Everyone in favour? All in favour in that? Okay.
Thank you, Councillor. I've just had a message from Councillor Wharf, who's had to drop off, but just wish to particularly thank this committee for its interest and its engagement in this process. Although it can be seen as quite a dry subject matter, this is really one of the key changes that we see as adult social care. So he's very grateful for both the interest and the questions that have been hugely helpful in helping us to refine some of the work that we're going to do going forward. So he wanted to personally thank each and every one of you.
Thank you. Councillor Lugg, did you want to come in?
I think we need an update on how far we're processing with this at every meeting, because it's so crucial to this council.
Yes, I mean, I'm more than happy to work through, we have a programme. We are able to report regularly on progress, whether that be a sort of written report or as we indeed get more information about some of the work streams that we haven't got the detail on, to come back and discuss that with you. But yes, as a programme, Chris is sitting next to me, we have quite a high level of reporting that we're able to provide, so we can do that.
Thank you. Councillor Knox.
Just to add to that, and as a reminder, and I know, Chairman, you mentioned it earlier, I would really like to see a double act here and see our place colleagues actually committing to this at the same time. So, yeah, this isn't just about one directorate. This is about the whole council. So that's the area I'd like to really have a look at, if possible. Next meeting. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. That's all noted. Okay, we're going to take a break now. Okay, this is a long meeting. We've got quite a bit more to go through on the agenda. So we'll take 20 minutes. It's 25 to 12 now. We'll come back at 5 to 12. Thank you, members.
There should be tea and coffee in the members' room.
There better be. There'll be trouble. Okay, we're back, are we? Okay. We good? We're back live? Okay, thank you for that, members, and thanks for coming back so promptly. Rather than get messy partway through the meeting, at 12:30 we would have had to vote to extend the meeting beyond the 3-hour period. So I'm going to do it now. So I propose from the chair that we extend the meeting beyond the 3 hours to go on no longer than 1:30 today. Okay, I so propose, seconded by Councillor Batstone. All those in favour? Thank you. We're now going to go back to item 9, which is a presentation on developing a strategy for the Dorset Integrated Care Partnership. Sam, welcome to the meeting. I know you've been tied up on other things this morning, and I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you very much, Chair. Good morning, committee members. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Sam Crowe. I'm the Joint Director of Public Health for Dorset and BCP Councils, and I just want to say thank you very much for committee's time in considering this item today. So I've got a presentation which supports the paper which you've had in your agenda pack. If you bear with me, I'm going to share my screen and I'll just walk you through the slides. And then when we've finished the presentation, I think what would be helpful, certainly for me, is to hear from members of the committee about how you wish to remain engaged in the development of the strategy process. And as conversation I was having with George Dare recently, we're expecting further national guidance on the role of overview committees and scrutiny committees in relation to the Integrated Care Partnership. If you bear with me, I'll just bring the slides up and hopefully you should be able to see. Is that coming through clearly for you now?
Yes, we can see that, Sam. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. So the purpose of today's session is just a reminder of the requirements of integrated care partnership strategies and the approach that we're going to take in Dorset in building the strategy. I'm going to share with you some of the progress that we've achieved so far and then walk committee through.
Sam, you
We
appear
get
to be muted.
I'm off mute. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you again now.
Okay, sorry, it might be a spotty Wi-Fi connection, but hopefully you can hear me loud and clear. So before we get into the detail about the requirements of the strategy, I was just going to remind committee of the changes to the health and care system, which are coming in 2 days' time. So on the 1st of July, we will have a formal new body which replaces the Dorset CCG, which is going to be known as the Integrated Care Board. And these 4 lenses are quite important, I think, for committee to understand in terms of the changes coming into the local system. So starting on the left-hand side, when we talk about our Dorset health and care system, we're talking about the whole of the public services working together alongside the community and voluntary sector to try to plan, provide and manage NHS social care and prevention services more effectively. And that includes the body that I've just mentioned, the new Integrated Care Board called NHS Dorset, which replaces the Clinical Commissioning Group. The next lozenge along, called the Dorset Health and Care Partnership, is what we're talking about today. So the Integrated Care Partnership is responsible for developing a strategy, and that sets a framework and ambition around how we should be identifying the right priorities for NHS and care organisations to focus on, but above all, it needs to fall in line and show how we're meeting the national requirement for supporting people and communities to lead healthier lives, be more independent and address some of the inequalities that we see in our communities. The third lozenge over is something called place-based partnerships. So under the Integrated Care Partnership, there will be 2 place-based partnerships based around the Dorset Council footprint and the BCP Council footprint. And this is about devolving health and care planning to a more local level. So where there are significant issues that are of difference affecting Dorset Council residents, you might expect a slightly different solution. the place-based partnership gives us the ability to take account of those issues and to plan services accordingly to meet that need in a way that might be different in the BCP Council area. And then finally, on the right-hand side, this is quite new. This is this idea of provider collaboratives. So in health services previously, the providers of healthcare have been commissioned in a competitive way. The legislation has removed many of those requirements to deliver services through competitive tender. And they talk about the formation of provider collaboratives, so that enables our health and care organisations to come together in a single organisation and consider how best to deliver care working better together. So it effectively removes barriers between organisations that previously would have been there. The point is we can be more transformational about ideas of sharing workforce. We can respond to particular issues in the health and care system and perhaps embed a bit more resilience in the way that we're thinking about planning health and care. So those are just some of the significant changes coming in 2 days' time. In terms of the health and care bill itself, this is what it said in terms of the strategy and planning requirements. The important box today is the box in the orange, which is picked out. This is the Integrated Care Partnership Strategy. Guidance is expected in July about how to effectively develop the strategy. But the key point about this slide is that all of the other organisations in the health and care system need to have regard to what's in the Integrated Care Partnership Strategy, with the exception of health and wellbeing boards. So health and wellbeing boards sit right at the top in this diagram, and there's a recognition that they remain statutory boards. They already produce a joint health and wellbeing strategy, and the guidance to date that we've had suggests that the Integrated Care Partnership Strategy needs to take account of that guidance. But health and wellbeing boards will also be required to approve and sign off on the ICP strategy. The most important thing, I think, is that the new bodies being established from the 1st of July, including the Integrated Care Board, have to show in their plans and strategies how they're going to deliver what we set out in the ICP strategy. So it's a fantastic opportunity to set a level of ambition around health and care services, particularly when we think about some of the inequalities in access to care that still persist across the county. Really important that we get the strategy right, and then we continue to monitor and assess the progress that our health and care system is making in making progress against the priorities as set out in that strategy. In terms of the strategy requirements, the more detailed guidance is coming out in the next few weeks, but already the government has said it expects that strategies will address the broad health and social care needs of the population. We need to set out how the strategy will support people to live more independent, healthier lives for longer. We need to be supporting our health and care system to take a more holistic view of people's interactions with services, so moving away from some of the more narrow approaches to service delivery that we've had from time to time. We have to set out how we'll address the evident inequalities in health and wellbeing outcomes, and also the differences in experience and access to health services that people report. And above all, we also need to make a comment on how we would look at improving some of the wider social determinants that are linked to health. So particularly how we're improving life chances, opportunities through better employment, housing, education, and efforts to reduce offending. So it's a broad strategy, but within that, it's really important that we set out really clear signals for the rest of the health and care organisations that they can pick up and work on, and in turn show real progress on when they're starting to report back on their plans and strategies. The other key point for me is that for the first time, councils will also be required by law to have regard to what we say in the Integrated Care Partnership Strategy. So over time, I'd expect a much more close alignment of council and NHS partners' strategies. So making sure that we get the ICP strategy right to help shape and frame those strategies is really critical. Just a note on the role of health and wellbeing boards. They will remain as statutory boards for the promotion of integration and prevention. They continue to have a legal duty to prepare a joint strategic needs assessment, and that's really the vehicle that informs what we're going to say about the most important priorities to improve the health and well-being of the population. They do function as a strategic partnership rather than executive body in their own right, but the focus that they have on a place such as Dorset Council I think is really important, and as the place-based partnerships develop, I would expect the health and wellbeing boards to have a really clear voice and important role in making sure that we're getting the priorities right for each of the partnership. And I'd predict that in July the guidance that will be released on the ICP strategy will continue to flag the importance of the health and wellbeing boards in developing that strategy. So in terms of progress to date, we've established a working group which has representatives from the voluntary community, social enterprise sector, both councils are represented, public health team is providing a lot of support into that group, as are colleagues from Dorset CCG. I'm delighted that I've been asked to lead the development of this process, and that's partly why I'm here to talk to committee today. We're adopting 3 work streams to build the strategy. There's a research layer, which is where we capture the outputs from the joint strategic needs assessment process, but we're also supporting that with a range of insights and evidence based on a number of local and national reports. So the point I'd make is that we've already done a lot of very, very helpful research locally over the past 2 or 3 years, which gives us a really rich picture of what people say about their experiences of health and care services. It's important we don't overwrite that, so we continue to build on the experience and the evidence that we have to date. I think the engagement layer is one of the most important things about the strategy. We are writing this in a very different way to the way that we've written previous health strategies. So in the past, I would observe there's been a bit of a tendency to follow national guidance, write something in a darkened room, and then come out to consult on it. Actually, we're taking a much longer development time and doing much more upfront engagement, both with the public, but also different boards and organisations across the system, just to warm people up to the opportunity to feed into the strategy development process. And then that's the final work stream, which is I've called system leadership, which is just how you build that engagement and ownership around developing the strategy. So it's really important that all of our councils, all of our boards of our organisations that contribute to health and care locally are engaged and understand the requirements of the strategy process, and also feel that they're able to contribute to the development of the strategy. So the first opportunity really is to note that we're having a joint health and wellbeing board development session, which will be on the 28th of July, to review the priorities coming out of both joint strategic needs assessments, and we'll also break out into a discussion to confirm and identify the health and care transformation opportunities that we are going to set out in the ICP strategy. So this slide shows that in a little bit more detail. This is the research approach that we're going to adopt. The JSNA, to some extent, gives you the sort of health facts, if you like, about the status of our health and wellbeing outcomes in our population, but we need to support that with the patient and public engagement findings, as well as some of the insights from the other research that's been carried out to date. So those concerns and opportunities and issues, and to some extent barriers to care that are identified through the panels that we've been running around the joint strategic needs assessment, will also feed through. We'll distill those and synthesize those into a summary and arrive at a common understanding of the priorities and the important needs that need to be addressed by the strategy. And then, most importantly, to note, this isn't a one-off process. I expect this will be reviewed at least annually. So we'll probably break into a cycle which would see regular workshops being held to update and refresh the integrated care partnership strategy. So there'll be plenty of opportunity for committees to continue to support that process. And if we don't get it right first time around, some of the more complex issues that I would expect will take a while to resolve, we can continue to revisit and continue to iterate as the strategy develops. Just a couple of slides on the engagement approach. The CCG has sort of changed its approach to engagement over the years in a very positive way, I believe. They're much more concerned at trying to put people at the forefront of a co-production approach when they're thinking about some of the solutions to the health and care challenges, and they're going to continue that with the development of the Integrated Care Board. As we build the strategy, we're making sure that the narrative that we develop when we're talking to residents is very similar to the narrative that we would use when we're talking to employees in the health and care system, because potentially they are two sides of the same coin. So when we're talking to people and asking them, how could the system support you better to live independently or to live as healthily as possible, we also want to ask similar questions to employees in our health and care system, but with a subtle nuance. Questions that we might be asking there would be, how can health and care organisations make sure that you're supported in your role to support people to live as healthily as possible? To do that, there are going to be 100 depth conversations carried out over a 6-month period, and we're identifying and training engagement champions from across the integrated care system organisations and recruiting extra ones from community and voluntary sector organisations and networks. So this team of 40 interviewers will be going out and collecting the story in Dorset and what it means to people to live their best life. And also, just to note, we're trying to reach into some parts of our community that wouldn't normally be represented in this sort of engagement exercise. So making sure that we've got proper representation from a wide range of ages, sexes, protected characteristics and communities. The Point of Care Foundation are being used to train the interviewers. They're all receiving guidance and training in how to carry out those interviews. And we've organised a support process to accompany people who are stepping forward to take part in those. The themes from those conversations will then be gathered and sort of synthesised, if you like, to then be shared through a digital engagement platform, as well as opportunities for face-to-face engagement across the county over the summer. So any issues that start to come through in those interviews, we would expect to then start to continue the conversation through social media platforms, just to try to draw more people in. So we've got a really, really clear picture of what's important to get right in the future of the health and care system. In terms of some next steps, we're at the moment progressing and developing the insight into some draft content for the strategy. It's likely that we will focus around 3 key areas. What are the population health outcomes that offer opportunities to work differently in each place? And that will show how we need to address those inequalities in health. We need to identify the most important health and care pathway opportunities. So this is a section that provides clear signals back to health and care providers and commissioners about where we want to see real improvements. And then the third is a placeholder really around transformation opportunities. So if we're really taking full advantage of the flexibilities and the freedoms that are coming forward in the health and care bill, how would we think differently when we're thinking about tackling the current pressures around workforce, access to services in a really innovative way, making sure that we're thinking outside of the box to really get ahead of those very, very challenging demands that we see at the moment facing our system. There'll be a system leaders workshop on the 26th of July, which will bring together the former members of the Systems Partnership Board and the new executive from the Integrated Care Board to develop and agree the overarching vision for the strategy, set out some of the aims, and also further discussion of what are the most important outcomes that we should be focusing on. Just a reminder of the current vision and mission in the integrated care system. It's really about working together to deliver the best possible improvements in health and wellbeing, and the mission is to transform the planning and delivery of health and care services. So we need to move from a situation where quite often we've done this in silos through the perspective of our own different health and care organisations. Councils and NHS sometimes haven't always worked as closely as they might in terms of thinking through from the perspective of people and communities how best to organise care. But this is signalling a real shift and a real step change in the opportunity to do this differently. So to deliver the vision and the mission, we need to plan together to make sure that we're investing the integrated care system resource where it's most needed. We need to be better at joining up delivery of services and make sure that we're working collaboratively across the public sector. involving our independent voluntary sector organisations. We need to genuinely listen to communities and work with them in starting to co-design some of those solutions. And above all, be perhaps a bit more transparent about how we collectively review how well we're performing as an integrated care system. If we've said that we're going to tackle a number of priorities, can we demonstrate real progress over the next few years against them? So just a few final thoughts about how to get involved. I've mentioned the Dorset Council and BCP Council Joint Health and Wellbeing Board Development Session. That will have the opportunity to join hybridly. It's not a formal board meeting, so the invitation list is certainly wider than formal Health and Wellbeing Board members. There'll be opportunities for digital and face-to-face engagement off the back of the engagement exercise that I described, focused around asking our communities what matters most. And then what I think it would be helpful to start to think about is how do we make sure that we're identifying the key issues in the Dorset Council area that the strategy should consider. There'll be an opportunity to review the draft strategy in September 22, and the final date for sign-off and adoption is December 22. But as I said in the presentation, this isn't a case of writing the strategy once and then finishing it. I think we'll almost be in a process of continuous engagement and development from this point on. So just a final thought to consider the committee's possible role. Is it about making sure the right priorities and policies are being reflected in the integrated care board plans that will improve the outcomes for Dorset Council residents? So what are the things that we really care about in Dorset Council on behalf of our residents that we feel absolutely have to be reflected in that strategy, and making sure that we're seeing action against them? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and happy to take questions and then perhaps move back to the report and the recommendations, Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam. That was a great overview to something which is new, and I think we have to appreciate I'm sure we've got questions for Sam, but this is something new and we won't necessarily have all the answers. Members, does anyone? Councillor Alford.
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and very informative presentation. Thank you, Sam. I was reminded of something that one of my colleagues said the other day in a completely separate meeting, talking about strategy. And it was the standard expression, what does success look like? And it seems to me this is a relevant case for asking that question, because it helps shape strategic objectives. So it's just a little point there. The second point has completely eluded me, so I'll come back to that one.
Thank you, Councillor Alford. Shall I come in on the what does success look like?
Yeah, please do, Sam.
So I think a short answer to that is that is absolutely a critical question, and it's not for me to really determine in the strategy development process what that should be. My feeling is we are in quite a complex space in the public sector where we would benefit from trying to simplify and reduce some of the high level priorities and above all get greater alignment between our health and care organisations in pursuing some of the most important. So my personal view as Director of Public Health is that we need to tackle some of the variation that we see. So in a lot of the health and care pathways, you will see some people that do very well and get very, very good care and support, but you also see a lot of evidence of communities that engage less well for a whole variety of reasons. And we need to address that fairly clearly in the ICP strategy. So I would expect that our recommendations will be around reducing variation in some of the big issues that affect the health of our population, particularly things like cardiovascular disease. So expect more of that to follow. But I would rather have fewer, better defined priorities that link with very, very clear outcomes where we can show progress rather than something that's complex and multi-layered.
Yes, the second point I was going to make was that, as I understand it, this strategy will be influential in the development of other strategies of related bodies. That sets an implication that our own strategy here needs to be completely absent with any form of ambiguity. Clarity is absolutely essential. Otherwise, other organisations will take their own interpretations of what is said rather than operating on a consistent focus.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think anyone who is experienced in certainly some of the pressures that the NHS is facing at the moment will realise that there is a risk that we keep getting distracted from some of the medium-term work that has to happen to improve health and wellbeing outcomes over the longer term. And actually, sometimes organisations are under a lot of pressure to respond to the acute issues that are facing them. We have to find the right balance, but the ICP strategy is not about getting dragged into the acute end. It should be very much focused on what are the things that we need to do over the medium term to make sure that we're improving independence, improving health and well-being, because those are the things that will reduce the demand on all of our organisations over time. And it's important that we remain in that space. But it's not without challenge.
Thank you. Councillor Ezard.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, really good presentation, Sam. And I would like this presentation, it's different from obviously the paper. Is it possible to have those slides up to when you start to show us all the stuff that's actually on the paper? Those first few slides would be really good. The things I'm asking is, you say your current vision is to work together to deliver the best possible improvement in health and well-being. Now, obviously, all these different sections of people coming together have all got their own agendas, and you've got working group and, obviously the working workshop. So it is challenging, and you've got the system leadership first meeting workshop in July. That's a very short timeline in which to integrate everything together. Now, when you say how to get involved, does that for us as members, or does that mean the actual Dorset Council and BCP in particular, as officers, or all the partnerships to get together? I mean, what can we do as individuals, but what are happening, with the actual information that goes to all of these groups so that everybody will align, and so you do end up reducing variation and having a more consistent, opportunity for everyone. I mean, I know it's a bit asked, but how are you going about all this at the moment to actually bring everybody in line? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ezard. I think you've hit the nail on the head, really. This is an iterative process, and I think in the past we've been tempted to be perhaps a bit more prescriptive in writing strategies, but of course there's a risk that if it just comes from you, then there's no real ownership or engagement around what we're trying to achieve. So the short answer to the complexity that you've described is that we have to go through a process of being able to circle around the things that we think are important several times and keep having those conversations. And through that process, I think you get more and more clarity about what rises to the top in terms of what people are saying, what organisations are saying, and sometimes they're describing the same thing. They might just be using slightly different words. So through that process, we've been doing this engagement since April this year, particularly with the main organisations in the system, and we'll carry on doing it, particularly now that the public engagement part of the strategy development is kicking in. We'll be testing what the public are saying and going back around that circle, as it were, to keep refining and trying to sharpen up on what we're saying. So it may be that we don't get to a point in December where everything's entirely nailed down and clear, but what I'm saying is there's an open door for people to remain involved in being part of that conversation and that process of strategy development. So it might be that after 2 or 3 years we've finally got something that we feel is a genuinely helpful strategy that the organisations can feed off and can start to show very clearly what's their part in delivering, but we're still keeping it high level. We're still fixed on those medium-term outcomes, and we're able to demonstrate progress over time. That when we said that we'd go after variation in cardiovascular disease, for example, we're able to start to show that that's improved over, a 3 to 5 year period. So I think it is a messy process, undoubtedly. Organisations are in very, very different places, and they are often drawn back to the acute pressures rather than the things that we need to do, which will improve outcomes over the medium term. But it's partly my job and the strategy development team's job to keep drawing people back. What is the medium term opportunity? Because if we don't work on some of this stuff over the medium to longer term, we'll continually be facing those demand issues, which are so very, very challenging in frontline health and care.
Thank you. Just before we move on, can I just remind those in the chamber to use their microphones and make sure they're close, because apparently it's not picking up necessarily for the live feed. Next is Councillor Lugg.
I think it's really important that we focus on the residents of Dorset as the main priority going forwards. But I'm also quite concerned about the way we handle the different agencies and the staff. There will be a lot of uncertainty for people whose jobs will change. We've already heard this morning about some of the language used about Dorset Council feeling that they've not got a fair deal. How do we bring all the different organisations together to work in a collaborative way? Is there anything about that in the strategy?
Thank you. I think it's a really important question again. And I've been having this conversation as we've gone through, and we've engaged particularly with some of the boards of our NHS providers, for example. And sometimes the questions come back, how much are you going to solve in the strategy around some of the current acute pressures? My answer has tended to be that I don't think that's helpful. A strategy, to some extent, should set the medium to long-term framework. And actually, I think that then you go into a process of discovery and co-delivery, if you like, where we're asking organisations to work more closely together to try to resolve those issues. So I don't think that will be answered by the strategy, because it's not really about the solutions, it's more about the how. But then you need to break into a process where the Integrated Care Board and its providers, including councils who've got obviously a strong offer in the care sector, need to be around the table collectively, working with people and communities to try to listen to what they've said isn't quite working, and how would we do this better if we were thinking very, very differently about the best possible use of resources given what people are saying. So it's a very different way of working. I think that's what I'll say. It's very different to how we've worked as a system in the past, but it's certainly it's a brilliant opportunity, and we shouldn't miss that opportunity of giving it our very best shot is what I would say. I would just be hesitant to have the strategy drawn too far into the solution space, if that makes sense. I think that's for organisations to work through together, but above all, making sure they're including people as part of that conversation. We need to be up here, setting the framework, setting the key objectives that we want to see improvement around in the system, but we shouldn't really be getting drawn into the space of solving things. But it's going to be a big change, and I think it's going to take a bit of time for us to move into that space. If you look at the national timetable for devolving budgets down to those place-based partnerships that I mentioned, there would be no expectation of any devolving of budgets until April 2023. So it's going to take us a while, I think, to work out how to do that effectively as a partnership, but the strategy process effectively kicks that process off. It's the first piece in the jigsaw, and then the organisations will have to start to get together to understand how best they can deliver against the strategy requirements once we've published it in December. Does that help? Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Batstone.
Yes, thank you. As you're talking, Sam, I was particularly focusing on the review and evolve part of your diagram. And one thing that is apparent to me as someone who's been around a particular part of Dorset for a long time is how populations can change. For example, in our little market town, for the last few years, we've had a lot of folk who've come in to work, younger people, Eastern European, with different health needs because of the stage of life they're at, some of them starting their families. 10% suddenly change of folk from a different culture. Higher tendency, is my impression, to smoke, so we need to be getting that message out there again in that small area. And also, we also, across the board, I think, have that issue of problem of obesity leading to health issues. So the review and evolve bit, to me, is very important, because we need to be fleet of foot in dealing with the particular issues coming up the line, which may be very different in different bits of Dorset. I don't think anyone else has quite the same number of migrants coming into the town as Sturminster and its immediate surrounding area has. So that is my, if you like, interest. And the other interest I have, of course, is how we reach out to some of our communities who are ethnically different, particularly reaching out to a Gypsy and Traveller community, who are our largest ethnic minority, and how we make sure we focus in on their healthcare needs. But I'm sure there are other smaller ethnic groupings who also need specific response and care. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Badstone. Very good points there. I think the population issue is really relevant, and we're just about to start to see the first releases from the census. But of course, that only happens every 10 years. And I think what this policy change is signalling is more flexibility to go down to the level of communities and neighbourhoods and really work with community organisations, primary care, community services, who are probably best placed to know, who's experiencing significant health needs, and how does the current system perhaps not always deliver most effectively against those. So I think it's, I would hope that this provides a bit more of a blueprint for more flexibility in thinking through how we genuinely engage people in different ways, because what we know from the evidence is when you provide services in a single way that perhaps suits professionals, they're taken up very differently by different sections of the population for very obvious reasons, whether that's lack of understanding, lack of health literacy, different language barriers. There's all sorts of reasons why people don't necessarily always come forward and benefit from that. So I think it's a real opportunity to think very, very differently about how we do engage people. And that starts with those conversations, as I mentioned in the presentation. Tell us how we can support you to live your best life. What does that mean? That's a very, very different conversation to something that's sometimes framed more narrowly around accessing specific health services. So we do have to think differently, but I've been really encouraged by the enthusiasm and passion shown by the voluntary and community sector organisations, who are often very well placed to understand some of these issues, and I think they're very, very ready to step forward and be part of this journey, which I'm really excited about, because I think that's where good health starts.
Thank you. Doesn't appear any other members wish to speak. Do you have anything else further, Sam?
No, I think just to go back to the recommendations in the paper, and I think just from my perspective, we haven't yet received all the national guidance about the role of overview committees and scrutiny in shaping how we're delivering against the strategy. But I'm sure that that's a topic that we will come back to as the guidance is published, and I would hope the committee remains interested and involved and ready to feed in. So thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you. And I think taking those points on board, we don't know clearly what overview and scrutiny we'll have in this. But can I just have a sense from members that we broadly support the work that Sam and his team are doing? Okay, thank you. I don't know whether you saw that, Sam, but that we're supporting you and look forward to further updates. And thank you very much for your time this morning.
Thank you very much. I'll make sure a copy of the slides is provided for committee as well.
That's appreciated. Thank you. You're welcome to stay, but equally we won't be offended if you have other things to go to. We'll move on now to, apologies, item 11, which is the developing commissioning strategies for adult and social care, and it's back to John and his team.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm really pleased to bring the draft strategies here today for comment. We've done a lot of work to get to this stage, but it is part of a longer piece of work which will involve us co-producing or engaging with the public and people who use our services. So really keen to get your comments and views on both what's written in front of you in the strategies, but also our approach over what we're calling the Summer of Co-Production. So I'm joined today by Mark Tyson, who has been the author of most of the strategies. It has been a team effort, but Mark, has done some excellent work here. So we're really keen to note down anything from this process today. And as Peter Wolf alluded earlier, we will be bringing these back to a future date once we've completed that co-production piece. So what we've got in the slide deck really is this. So a little bit about the process to get us to this stage today, and then we're going to walk through each of the 4 strategies one by one and pause for comment in a similar way to the presentation of the reforms. So I'll start by giving you an overview of what the 4 strategies are. So if we could have the next slide, please. So we have an overarching strategy, which really sets out the context, how we commission, the markets that we commission within, looks towards that place conversation and the ICS, so the item from Sam just previously, and our approach really to the design of strategies, co-production. It also looks at some of those key points that we picked up in the reform. So, our prevention offer, our work at community level, at PCN level, how we think digital, can really assist us, with some examples of how that is in play in other parts of the country, and then some more detail about sort of our approaches to personal budgets in that overarching strategy. We then have a separate strategy for commissioning for a better life for older people with support needs, which goes into ageing well, that community support offer, day opportunities offer, the sort of home care offers that we could see in the future, extra care, and of course residential and nursing care. The third strategy is around people of working age, and this strategy does look towards that joint commissioning strategy for birth to settled adulthood that I mentioned previously, and really is a sort of us linking that up for an all-age strategy for people up to that transition at 65 to older people's services. So again, very much focusing on learning disability, mental health, physical disability, sensory impairment, and those day opportunities and how they underpin people's existence in the community. So we're going to dive into that. And then finally, the commissioning strategy for carers. So those are the full suite of strategies that we are bringing today. If I could have the next slide, please, Mark. So just a little bit about how that fits into the wider sort of golden thread of strategy. So we've talked a little bit about the Dorset Council Plan and the mission statements. We have a Better Life Directorate Plan, which underpins not just the commissioning strategies, but the work that we've been doing towards strengths-based practice over the last few years. And what we will have under that is the overarching commissioning strategy with those 3 areas, of older people, working age and carers. As we work through this and we engage over the summer, what we are also hoping to do is to produce the strategy that really sort of sets out our assets across the community, the strengths that exists in those communities, and some of the resource that the council has. Now, we won't exclusively look at just council resource, but I think it is worth noting that through this work today, we are aware of considerable assets that the council has at place, and that will be a part of the focus. And I know that came up in the reform piece, but just to note, that is in our thinking here alongside those housing strategies. Next slide, please, Mark. So each of the documents, as I said, sets out the context. Through all of our strategies, the right support, the right time, and the right place runs through. So this is very much at the heart of our approach. We talk about the why, some of the barriers, and what do we need to do. So they're very comprehensive in terms of walking you through. And at the moment, we haven't added some of the data that will be in the final drafts. Some of that data will come from the exercise that Sam just referenced, the refresh of the JSNA. So that's a key data set for informing what the future need will be for people who are in long-term adult social care. It's not the only data set, but it is a key data set. We are also in receipt of many data sets from the work that we do and historical information based on locality that we'll be using. So those bits will be pushed into the strategies when they come back at that final stage. Next slide, please. I'm going to hand over to Mark, who's going to just talk through the timeline.
Okay, so yes, I think as we've heard from the Director of Public Health earlier and from various contributors in the meeting, the development of any kind of strategy process is not something that's done in a kind of an isolation. And so we've built a process that allows this is the first sort of appearance of this set of documents in this form that brings together a lot of work on the part of a lot of the commissioning colleagues with other partners and colleagues across the council. So using these documents, this now initiates a period, we've called it the Summer of Co-Production. We build on the work that was done last year when we talked to a lot of users of the services and their families about day opportunities. And so a similar process, but actually it's probably going to take a bit longer than that because I think there's so much content here that we want to make sure we do set up the right conversations over the period and to come towards the end of the year with a more polished product that's had opportunity for people to contribute. So there's an important first stage I think we're looking at the moment around opening up because again the format of these documents is new, but a lot of the ideas and the content are all have been subject to a lot of existing conversations for some time with colleagues in the council, but we want to kind of engage with our colleagues to make sure that they're kind of they're on board with what's in these documents, and that as we go to the public with them, they're also ambassadors for them and are able to see what's being put forward. So there's a first stage around that. We've got things like our existing webinar process in adult services to use, and a number of other mechanisms for that. We know we've got to do a piece of work, which is underway at the moment, to produce some more digestible versions of these, some kind of punchier, more summary versions that people can more easily engage with. So again, we're working on that, and we're using web tools and so on to build that. We then are in a conversation, and it's referenced on the timeline, with our stakeholder advisory group for the A Better Life programme, who is some of our community and voluntary sector partners to engage them in the how we might do this summer of activity. Of course, we've got lots of ideas and we're building the programme, but we want to involve in the design of that that stakeholder advisory group. So that happens in a couple of weeks. And then we're starting to build this programme, as I say, around open access sessions at key venues, so people can come and drop in and talk to us about the plans that are starting to emerge, some key thematic discussions, whether that's with our partners in the provider market in adult social care, and some of those bigger themes that's, for example, in the older people strategy around care homes and the future of the care home market. So that we need some targeted conversations with providers about that, for example, but also, of course, people who use our services, their families, and the residents of Dorset on particular issues about what have we got our broad intentions in these strategies right for the future. So we'll be setting up seminars and workshops through the period to kind of invite comment, and then there'll be sort of a relatively standard online commenting opportunities built as well, so people can sort of chip in their thoughts and comments. And we're very keen at all points and obviously welcome the committee's view on how to involve elected members in all of that, any and all of that, and kind of constructive ways of doing that works for members. I think there's a thing to just really emphasise, and it's in the paper, but that this is the start of the process. So the fact that there are 4 quite weighty documents here is not the kind of end of a conversation, it's the beginning of it. And that even at the point I think that these come back, and again, I think the Director of Public Health alluded to it in the discussion about the ICS's strategies. Strategies don't fix in time. They're not a once and done process. So what we do think, though, is that we've got some very solid work here that is a starting point for some quite powerful conversations about where we think social care goes in the future, which will continue to iterate and develop as people are better able to engage with Dorset Council about what we think the future looks like and the work we're doing. So that's the overall intention there. I don't know, John, if you want to add anything further at that point.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. No, I think, it really is important that we do stress that these aren't designed to just sit on the shelf. They're going to be living documents, and as the JSNA gets refreshed, so will this. So we're making that alignment with wider need. So not just the adult social care need, but primarily these are about the commissioning needs of adult social care. Linkage over time is inevitable, and we very much support that, but it is important we recognise that. Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to pause at that point just to take any initial questions.
Councillor Holloway.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, I welcome this commission for this. I think this is something that is really important for all of our communities. I'm particularly pleased that in 3.4 in the report about us as elected members about what we can do to help with this. I think that's very important. I think certainly, membership seminars is going to be extremely useful. And just want to clarify on the point about bringing town and parish councillors on board as well, because I think that is extremely important for our communities as well, is making sure that we as the council here sort of extend an olive branch to our town and parishes, because they are also very crucial in sort of identifying what sort of care needs are. So I just want to say is that, I take it in future we intend to sort of approach the town and parishes as well, and to give them briefings in the future on that.
Yeah, thank you. So the intention is the co-production over the summer. We will be going out and about, so we'll be in the different towns and villages around Dorset. And the idea of doing that is we're actually able to engage with a broad cross-section of people. We would very much hope that we'll get representation from the town and parish councils at those events, because you're absolutely correct. I mean, not only are councillors in the broadest sense key in identifying need. What also you are quite key in is identifying existing assets. And Dorset's a big place, so local knowledge is key for us in moving some of that bottom section of that burger that I showed you, the strategy burger, forward. So no, we would really want to engage at that level. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other members got any comments? Councillor Orford.
Thank you. Just one or 2 points as comments. First of all, I noticed on page 328 that the additions don't add up properly, so something has been spotted. Of the 3 areas that you are presenting on today, my personal feeling is that the services for carers is absolutely key. I think we rely on carers so much that the more we can do to support them really does make a difference. So I feel as though carers are in the role of customers as well as others. Throughout the text, there are references to various services that are provided, with some comment about how effective they are. My overall impression from reading the text is that very often these are services supplied on a very small scale. And I just wondered to myself, if there was an increase in the scale of that provision, what difference would be made? So I think there is a question of the scale of the activity behind what's going on, to the extent it's looking at the marginal situation of a unit more resource. What benefit is achieved there? So I think that's something that I recognised. And then something that wasn't mentioned very much, and that's the issue of mobility. Mobility matters to people so much, and it can make a real difference to their lives. Now, there are occasional references to it, but nothing of any great significance. And I just wonder if further thought can be given to that as a topic.
Yes, the short answer is absolutely, and thank you for that. I mean, the purpose of coming here today is to get some critique on how they're reading and what's coming across. I mean, mobility is a key issue, and as I've said earlier in the session, we know falls often contribute to people joining a longer term care journey. So that is something we will certainly give more thought to. Carers, absolutely. The carers strategy was the first strategy that we developed in draft, actually gave us quite a lot of frame for the other strategies. So it's a front runner, but the importance of supporting our carers is utmost. So just want to acknowledge that. But thank you for the comments.
Thank you. Any other members got any comments before we move on to the next section? Councillor Azad.
Yeah, mentioned as being for looking after carers. I understood, and perhaps you answer the question, that in a strategy that was brought forward by the government 2 or 3 years ago, that assessment for carers for their respite was something that we should be doing or must be doing as a council. And I wonder how much we've done towards that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Yes, so absolutely, and I'll let Steve come in around the assessment piece. But in terms of these strategies, they're about what services we will provide for carers. So I'll hand that one to Steve.
So thank you, Councillor Izzard. The simple answer is yes, we are. So all of my adult social care workforce, be that an occupational therapist, a social worker, or an adult social care member of staff, will routinely ask the question to a formal or informal carer of an individual who they are assessing whether they would like a carer's assessment in their own right. As you'll see in some of the information that has been provided, we also have dedicated carers, caseworkers. So where there's slightly more complex situations or where people have individual carers' responsibility in their own right, we will do an independent carers assessment. But predominantly, a lot of the Care Act assessments are done in conjunction with carers assessments at the point in time that someone is being assessed under their Care Act eligibility. So yes, that is happening. And as John's rightly said, that feedback that comes out of those carers assessments is then fed into the demand and the needs mapping of what services do we need to have in. Some of that is respite, but some of it is also a flexibility around things like direct payments or individual service funds where people can then choose how to help themselves within their carer's role. But is there more to do? Absolutely there is, but we certainly are making great strides and making sure that we do support our carers.
Thank you. Conscious of time that we need to press on, we've only got half an hour left of this meeting now, so we'll let you get on with the next section.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, so I'll try and walk through these a bit quicker than previously. So this is the overarching strategy. I think I've given you an overview of what will be in that, but it really sets the scene, our approach, and some of the techniques that we'll be using across the next 5 years. Next slide, please, Mark. These are just key points to note from the earlier session, just around where we are making those linkages around housing. Talked a little bit about that today, but hopefully that starts to come through. The technology-enabled care, we've also touched on prevention equally, and then some of those new ways of delivering services through different types of direct payments. Direct payments themselves are not new, but there are different ways that we can use direct payments moving forward. Actual services that are only technology-based, digitally based, very much that strengths-based working, so wrapping the services around someone's strengths rather than their weaknesses, which was the old model of deficit. So that's new. And then our relationship with the market. So talked a lot in previous sessions about how we need to change the dialogue with providers. We are working on that. Fair cost of care is one tool, but also our key contractual relationships, some of our partnerships that could offer us the opportunity to develop new services where providers are willing to invest, are investing. So very much a different approach to the one that we've taken previously in that relationship with key providers. Mark, over to you.
Okay, so just to take you on a very brief canter through the content of the strategies, and appreciate you've all had them in the pack. So the overarching strategy starts with some really important, the golden thread piece, how we connect what we're doing here with the Directorate's wider vision and with the Council corporate plan. So, and that's so that we don't have to repeat that in every other strategy and everything becomes a bit too weighty and wordy. The meat of it, though, are a set of sections that are about, firstly, how we work with the care market, and John's just alluded to that at the end of the summary of the links to reform, but our approach on fair cost of care, market sustainability, and of course that will evolve as the market sustainability plan is developed and finalised for submission. Commissioning in places and through partnerships. So I think there's an interesting thing to explore between the ICS talking about the commissioning for place, the place being Dorset, and in this strategy, I think we refine that a stage further by talking about places within Dorset. And I think as we have these conversations over the summer into the autumn, and particularly, and we talked earlier about the involvement of towns and parishes and of course ward councillors, we start to get that sense of place and can advocate that back into the partnerships that we're engaging with, such as through health. So there's some of that set out there, and in the context of the Better Care Fund and collaboration with the voluntary and community sector. Talks about our digital vision, tries to put a framework to that so that people can understand the role that digital innovation can play in delivering a care system for the future, and certainly one that's sustainable in the face of some of the changes that we've heard about earlier. And then there's two quite chunky pieces in this strategy. One about prevention and community inclusion, which sets out two priorities. One about active participation and resilient communities, and all of that work so that people who have a disability or a mental health condition or developing frailty are living in communities that support them to continue to live and to thrive. And then onto almost the next layer down in prevention terms, which is the support for independence, and that includes things like technology-enabled care and touches on some of the housing work that we talked about earlier as well. So all of that, so again, all of these strategies try to start that kind of upfront preventive stuff and then work into the more acute delivery of care as they go through. Direct payments and individual service funds have been referred to. Move us on a bit because that's on the next slide. So direct payments and individual service funds have been referred to. And then I think setting out our vision and ambition and what we mean by co-production and partnership, it sets a framework for everything in the other strategies, because it's our commitment to do that, and people can hold us to that and understand where we're coming from when we're in future developing services and are saying that we will be involving people. There's then sections on insight as well, because I think data and the use of data and how we use data is an important part of setting a framework for developing future services, and that will also help our colleagues who do the data crunching and the analysis to kind of build a program with us that supports the priorities we're identifying. And then there's some references to safeguarding commissioning for quality. I think that's as we develop some of the CQC related reform work, that will expand and develop further, so there will be more of that in the finalised documents. And then at the end, we've got some of the things that we're still working on through this process, but will be the kind of how we monitor this and how people can know we're delivering it and so forth. And then the final bit is a glossary of terms, which is yet to be kind of filled out, but we'll just gathering as we go along everything that people might be saying to us over the next couple of months. Well, what's that? So we'll have a kind of comprehensive glossary of adult social care terminology that we can use for the future. So that's the canter through the overarching strategy. Sorry.
Do members have any comments on that, or can we move on to the four main bits? Okay.
So the first of the strategies, older people with support needs in Dorset. So talked quite a lot about our over 65s population, a significant population in Dorset, and how we help people to age well is very important on every level. So, you know, very much at the heart of these strategies is outcomes, and trying to ensure that people you know, live full and fruitful lives in the community, in their community, for as long as possible, is at the heart of these strategies. So it is very much around strengths, you know, but where people have needs, we will be obviously developing personalised services to wrap around them. Quite key in this area really is that interface with health, and I think there's a lot of opportunity as we develop that journey through the ICS to develop different approaches within these strategies for older people. If I can go to the next slide, please. Oh, you're okay. So yeah, so we've outlined the outcomes here, and I won't read them, but I'll just pull out one which is around sort of that reablement offer, and again we've talked about that previously as something we would want to increase and diversify, and that goes across all types of equipment and digital as well. So those are the key outcomes that are in that section. Mark, if I hand over to you.
So just to take a short tour through. So the strategy is structured around setting out some of the key data that we know about ageing in Dorset, and a vision for a better life for older people. So the broad commitments and intentions before we get into the detail. We've called it a snapshot of service demand because, again, any data in any strategy is going to be out of date within months of it being in there. So we tried to keep it as it's a point in time, gives a sense of what we're working with. And then we get into the sort of the meat of it, as it were. So ageing well in inclusive communities, which seeks to apply the prevention methodology in the overarching strategy into the kind of the world of older people in Dorset. And into that is some of the thinking about day opportunities and moving from day services to day opportunities, which is explored in a much more substantial way in the working age people adult strategy, but is relevant, of course, for older people with dementia who do access day services. So there's a companion piece between those two strategies. And then we get into the three sort of most substantial kind of care service type thinking around what we need to do for the future. So the first one is, of course, care and support at home, which has sets out the challenges of delivering those services in this part of the world, including things like rurality, proposals to kind of create zones so that it's easier for providers to work with us and manage care delivery. Reablement and its role as a preventive intervention, not only as something provided after a hospital stay. That's and the aspiration to work on workforce development with the local provider market. Accommodation with care and the role of extra care housing, and again that links to the adult social care reform piece we heard earlier. And then finally into residential and nursing care, where some of the challenges in that market are set out and some of our proposals for how we'll work with partners to address them. And that's the short whistle stop through there. Yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Lugg.
I see that permanent admission to a care home is considered only when all other options have been exhausted. But we will have a situation where, especially in East Dorset, where we've got these very large, very expensive care homes that are very underutilised, who are going to work very much against that. What kind of conversations can we have with those care homes about this? And the other thing which I noticed is mentioned later on, but it's about having conversations with our residents long before they get to this stage about planning for the future, and how we go about advertising what is available, what they can expect, what they can't expect, and looking at things like whether they should be moving, if they're on their own, to be near a family, or when a partner dies, bereavement groups which will provide them with support. This all needs to be considered.
Yes, thank you. So yeah, all of the things that we've talked about today are linked. So reform is key, and reform of those care markets is key. Conversations will be had with the evidence base that we've got around cost, but also the evidence base we've got around future needs. So, whilst we've got providers that perhaps have capacity and that capacity isn't used, we'd want to be talking to them about how they might change that capacity towards areas that we're finding shortfall. So it is a conversation that we'll be having over the course of the strategy implementation, but it will be very much data led, and I think it's fair to say, as some of those new responsibilities come to the council for potentially commissioning on behalf of the general population, those conversations will have more weight, because at present we commission a fraction of the market. If everyone who comes to our door asks us to commission, which the evidence that we're seeing is that that's quite likely, that conversation and that market management is enhanced. So I think we will work with our providers, but I would expect change. And then the other bit, really, just around sort of preparing for old age. We talked to that about our information and advice strategy, but I think someone said today, and I've written it down, start talking to people's children, because often my parents are not in this category, but often parents listen to their children and their children help them plan. So I think that's really important. We feature that as well. Thank you.
If I can just follow up as well on the importance of recognising as a council our older population as assets, not just burdens in Dorset Council. So actually, I'm sure many members of us volunteer within our local areas. We have connection points, we have relationships, we have groups that we either participate in or also are part of. We must recognise that actually our older people are not just a burden, they are also an asset that we will both help and support as we go through with this.
Thank you. Any other member comments before we move on? No, I believe we'll move on to working age people.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, in terms of this strategy, we've defined it as 18 onwards, but it is looking to that all-age strategy with children's and the work through birth to settled adulthood. So I think that's just a key point I would make here. Again, inclusion, recovery, progress are all at the heart of what we would like our future services to deliver. So we're setting an expectation, I think, over and above that exists at the moment through this strategy. Next slide, please, Mark. As with the other strategies, these are the key outcome areas that are identified. And I think I've said earlier in the session, there's a lot of language around personalisation here, so choice and control. But again, making sure that we've got the right housing options to allow people to remain living in their communities. So that we know is one of our challenges, but one fully committed to through this strategy. Mark.
Okay. Oops, sorry, I've skipped to the carer strategy. Okay, so yes, so again, it starts with the vision, and we've seen those four outcomes. And again, when we're posing these outcomes, we are posing these for debate and discussion. So I think they're not, even this part isn't the kind of set in stone. Are these the things that mean something to the people of Dorset, and we can base our strategies around. So we have a data snapshot, and then we go straight into the shaping provision. I think the challenge that this strategy document has, and I'll sort of be quite open about it, it's because it's ranging across learning disability and mental health and physical disability and sensory impairment. It's actually quite a broad document to try and manage, and it may be that we get feedback on this, and again, absolutely invite the committee's views, that there's a more clear way of structuring it between those different service, I want to say service user groups, but it's not quite the right language, but I think you understand the point I'm making. So I think we're open to a conversation definitely about whether we've got that bit right, but yet there are things that are in common, there are outcomes in common that we believe anybody with who has additional needs through their working age will need for us to support them on. So it talks through kind of some of the particular care groups and the issues that we see in the provision of services for them, and then moves on to how we want to shape provision. So there are some common themes here around how we'll use the Dorset Care Framework, some of the market challenges, the provision of respite services, some of the specialist services, assistive technology, and so on, that are explored here, and linked back to some of what, again, is in that overarching strategy about our broad intention around developing the social care system. It then moves on to the significant issue that's been alluded to a couple of times by John around birth to settled adulthood. So a major kind of joint piece of work has just been launched to develop the shared systems between children's and adult services for transition, and that's reflected in here. That's of course a work in progress as well, so that's still in its developmental phases. So this will have to evolve as that programme starts to shape it. Then there's the strategy about day opportunities. And again, the thinking that builds very much on the summer of co-production from last year, when people told us about the way they want to access day opportunities, about what they knew about what was available to them in Dorset, and the emerging thinking about day services versus day opportunities and how we open up that conversation. And that's all set out in here as our initial response to what we were told in that summer, and very much this will be, I think, a significant theme for discussion with people who use those services over the coming months, to see whether or not that just the outline of our thinking is in the right direction before any firmer plans are made. Accommodation with care and supported living and shared lives then follows. We'd had earlier in the strategy, there's a debate about some of the kind of more acute, small numbers, but quite significant acuity of care that is provided to this care group. So that's in there as well. And the action plans, actually, the one thing to note is that there's a series of service reviews that are underway in parallel with the development of this strategy framework. And so that they will continue to develop over the coming months in parallel with the conversations we have. So I think they will inform the next draft of this, and it'll have quite a substantial weight of additional content that's from those service reviews. Oops, leave that there. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, thank you. The one thing that struck me, and I'm really glad you picked up on the point, was the complexity and such the diverse range that sits within this thing. And I'd certainly like to see some probably splitting this out of it. It almost to me feels like too much in one strategy, looking at that whole broad spectrum that falls within that kind of age.
I think one of the things I was discussing with the commissioners involved, and it might be that it becomes a bit more learning disability, what we know, what some of the issues are in the provision, what's needed, what people tell us, and then on to mental health, and we separate it by just a little, but we'll work on that over the coming months, I think.
Appreciate it. It's early doors on that, but yeah, I think it's good that we're recognising those things. Is there any other member comments? Councillor Lugg.
Just a quick comment. I'm quite keen to capture the voice of the person with a learning disability rather than their parent or carer, because their views, as it says in the report, are quite often different.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Councillor Ezard.
Thank you. The thing you mentioned about shared lives, I'm on the Shared Lives panel with Carol Jones, and I'm amazed that people in their own homes will take in, people that need help to live their lives. And it's fantastic. And I think that we did have a briefing to members, and I would like to see a lot more publicity about that to actually get other people, get loads more families on board to actually do this if they can, and to know about it. And I think it's a marvellous thing to do in Dorset, and for people who got adequate, living accommodation for that, of course. So it is quite a humbling thing to be on that committee, to see people offering their homes for this sort of thing. Sorry, my throat's a bit funny. So thank you.
Yes, thank you, Council. I mean, it is a fantastic service, and it's at the heart of our approach here. So we will be embarking on a promotion of the service.
Thank you. I believe we can move on to carers now.
Okay, so carer strategy, I'll just pull out really, you know, that we see this very much as support that's required throughout the caring journey. So, you know, the point about shared lives services, you know, is relevant in terms of some support that carers give to people who have learning disability, and when they age, you know, where is the kinship, where's the support that comes at the end of their time. So, you know, this is very much about how do we wrap the right services around that continuum of caring. Again, next slide, please, Mark. We have an outcomes focus, and you know, I would just, you know, pull out really that point about carers have access to a range of support responsive to their needs in the community and from the council. So, you know, that is really at the heart of this strategy and an area for real development. I'll hand over to Mark to do the next bit.
So one final slide then for this. So the strategy sets out first an account of who is a carer, and all the different definitions and terminology. When we did some work with, which was led by Councillor Cherry-Brooks, which has kind of informed a lot of what's in this strategy, when we did this piece of work, there was quite a debate about what terminology to use about carers, and things like informal carer and unpaid carer that are in the government strategies and part of the national language, people didn't like a lot. So we've tried to kind of unpack some of that. We can't necessarily fix all of that because sometimes we do have to use the language that means something to people we're talking with in government, but we're totally respecting that there's some views there. So we set out what the carers, definitions and terminology about carers. And then vision for carers, again, the right support, right place, right time. It also references the fact that there's a parallel piece of work or sort of a similar timing piece of work around developing a partnership strategy. But our view is, and it's very much across all of these strategies, if we're clearer about how we, from where we're at the moment, see the world, partnership strategies are easier to develop because in a sense we are then pooling our combined views on the world. So this will absolutely support that piece of work through the carers group, carers reference group. And so we've got the objectives that are then kind of grouped together in the later action plan. Then there's a sort of the account of services for carers, looking at universal and commissioned services, and some of the issues that are around carers, services that we have identified need our work, and that carers have told us we need to work on things. And it kind of sets out where we've already got commissioning plans in train around recommissioning, for example, kind of carers cards and thinking about the future of the Carers magazine and so on. So that's all set out in this section, and then into our improvement priorities. And then there's an action plan at the end. And this one actually has an appendix which sets out some of the data and context in a bit more detail than the others, partly because it's a kind of much more defined group that we've been working with to produce this report. So I think it's also actually, it's important to say, I think, that it's got a lot of about what we do in adult social care, but there's a really important outcome around carers being recognised by the whole council and the whole community for the importance of the work that they do. And I think that was referenced earlier. And it might be that some of the feedback we get, and again, an invite comment, is have we captured enough of what we should be doing or could be doing on that wider piece in this document, or is it more adult social care focused than perhaps our ambition is, if that makes sense. So I'll pause there. I think that's the conclusion.
Thank you. Is there any member comments on that? Councillor Alford.
Yes, thank you. It's really just on the last points because it's all in the text as well, and there are some, I think, issues there that we do need to be concerned with. I'm interested in how you'll undertake a co-production process with carers, because I have a suspicion that you could be talking to quite a coherent group of people there who could give you some quite serious and suggested solutions.
That's a very good question, because through the work with Councillor Brooks, we did involve a small number, so it's only a small number, but a small but very, as you say, cogent, articulate, very insightful group of carers who told us a lot of from what we subsequently then used to strengthen this strategy around elements of the caring system that do and don't work, the kind of the way they... There was one piece of feedback, for example, about carers' assessments, that people understand that word assessment to be, you're going to be assessing me on whether or not I can care, not assessing what my needs are to help me to cope with the burden of caring, and equally to then have a life around caring. So there's things there about how I use our information and advice to kind of get that message more clearly across, for example. So in terms of what the plans for the summer, I think it'll be a replication of that. We obviously got our partners in Carer Support Dorset and Rethink and the Dorset Carers Hub. And so I think by working with them, we can get some really good developments further on those conversations that we already started with carers. And probably, given we've just done a small piece of work, we were thinking that we might sort of timetable those a little bit later into the process rather than using the summer, and then get started on some of the conversations with older people and working age earlier. So, but we'll start sharing timetables and people can comment shortly.
Thank you. I'm not seeing anyone else wanting to speak, so I think thank you. I know we've sort of cantered through that, but I think it's been very, very valuable, and thank you to the team for all the work you've put into making this this happen for today. So appreciate that. In terms of next steps, I believe we're going to bring a number of elements of these back to this committee over the forthcoming months, and we may be putting some extra meetings in to facilitate that, and certainly the discussions we've had outside of this meeting. So can I just have an assent from members that we're happy with the strategy and the way we're moving forwards? Thank you, members. We'll move on to the forward plan, which is item 12. I think in the interest of time and expediency, there are a number of gaps in there, but I think in the fullness of time, those will be filled up with a number of the items we've spoken about today. So unless anyone has got any comments on the forward plan other than that, we'll move on. Item 13, exempt business. There is none. So I close this meeting at 13:28. And thank you all very much. It's been a marathon, but I think it's been really, really valuable and worthwhile. So thank you all very much.